It was supposed to be a night like any other, celebrating the love, the bond we'd shared for years. Our anniversary. We had been together for a decade, and tonight was meant to be the culmination of those years. A night for reflection and a celebration of how far we had come. Emma and I had planned every detail. The table was set with candles and soft music playing in the background. The night was perfect, but something about that night felt off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it yet. I remember looking at Emma as she walked into the room. Her eyes sparkled like they always did, and her smile was warm, just like when we first met. Yet, there was something hidden in the way she held herself. It wasn't the same warmth I had come to know over the years. This was different. As she sat across from me, I could feel an eerie silence that seemed to consume the space between us. I tried to push the thought out of my mind. Let's not ruin this moment, I told myself. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. Maybe it was the way her laugh sounded hollow, or the way she kept glancing at her phone, quickly turning it face down each time I caught her. Or maybe it was because I didn't feel the usual connection. I couldn't explain it, but it was there, lingering in the background. But what I didn't know was that the truth was standing just outside the door. And as the evening progressed, the tension would begin to unravel in the most unimaginable way. Then the doorbell rang. The moment we heard that ring, everything changed. My heart skipped a beat. Emma looked at me with wide eyes, her expression suddenly shifting to one of anxiety. I stood up, expecting it to be the waiter I had arranged for a surprise dessert, but as I opened the door, I saw him, Daniel. Daniel. He wasn't supposed to be here. My mind raced as I tried to piece together why he was at my doorstep on our anniversary night. My first thought was that it was some sort of misunderstanding, maybe a mistake. But as soon as I saw the look in his eyes, I realized there was no mistake. There was no misunderstanding. Daniel didn't speak at first. He just stood there, with a faint smile tugging at his lips. The kind of smile that said he knew something I didn't. And in that moment, I knew that everything I had thought was true in my life, my marriage, my relationship, my trust in Emma, was about to crumble into dust. My eyes flicked to Emma, and the look on her face confirmed my worst fear. She wasn't just surprised, she was terrified. And for the first time I saw guilt in her eyes, a guilt that ran deeper than I had ever imagined. My heart raced. The breath in my lungs became shallow. It felt as if the world around me had come to a screeching halt. Why was Daniel here? Why had Emma gone pale the moment she saw him? I felt a cold sweat form on my brow, but I tried to maintain my composure. James, Emma started, but her words were lost. She couldn't even look at me. She was trembling, and I could see her trying to gather her thoughts, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Daniel didn't wait for her to speak. "You didn't think I would find out, did you?" he said, his voice steady, almost mocking. "You didn't think I would come for you, did you, Emma?" I turned to Daniel, my eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" My voice was a mix of confusion and anger, but it was the kind of anger that felt useless, powerless. Daniel stepped forward, a smug expression forming on his face. "Emma and I have been together for months now, James," he said, each word cutting through me like a blade. "She's been lying to you. And you've been so blind, so naive." I could feel my entire world slipping from my grasp, as though the floor beneath me was crumbling away. The woman I had loved, the woman I had married, was standing there, caught in a lie so vast it could swallow me whole. She was with him, Daniel, the same man I had known as a friend, a trusted acquaintance. I turned to Emma, my voice hoarse. "Is this true?" The words were barely out before I felt the coldness settle in. She could only nod, her eyes filling with tears, but the tears didn't come. They were trapped, her guilt and shame holding them back. The silence between us was deafening. Time seemed to slow down. And then, finally, I heard what I had been dreading to hear. Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, James. I never meant for it to get this far." But how could she say that? How could she apologize for something like this? I didn't want her apology. I didn't want any explanation anymore. I wanted answers. I wanted the truth. The silence in the room was unbearable. It felt like the entire world was pressing down on me, each breath harder to take than the last. I looked from Emma to Daniel and then back to her, searching for an answer. Any answer that would make sense of this nightmare. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, but it didn't feel like reality. Felt like I was standing outside my own body, watching everything unfold in slow motion. The love of my life had been hiding a secret so massive, so intricate, that I could hardly breathe from the weight of it. But what was even worse was the fact that she had been hiding it from me. The one person she should have trusted the most. Me. Daniel, still standing in the doorway, hadn't moved an inch. He wasn't looking at me with any hint of guilt or remorse. Instead, he looked almost smug, like he was enjoying watching me crumble. I wanted to lash out, to scream, but no words seemed to come. I glanced at Emma again, searching her face for something, anything that could explain what had been going on. I wanted her to tell me it was all a mistake, that Daniel was lying, that she wasn't involved with him. But as I searched her face, I saw no relief, no hint of hope. No I'm sorry, just guilt. And worse, something that felt too close to indifference. I had known Emma for years. I thought I knew everything about her. The way she smiled, the way she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about our future. But standing there, staring at her in this moment, I realized I didn't know her at all. How could I have been so blind? Why? My voice broke, and I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Why Emma? Why him? The words felt hollow, but they were the only ones that made sense in my mind. Emma opened her mouth as though to speak, but the words didn't come. She was shaking now, her face flushed with embarrassment and shame, but the pain in her eyes was clear. I didn't mean for it to happen, James. It just did, she said, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. This wasn't an answer. It wasn't enough to explain the months of secrecy, of lies, of betrayal. How could she say she didn't mean for it to happen? How could she expect me to accept something so devastating with nothing more than a hollow apology? Daniel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. She didn't mean for it to happen, he scoffed. Come on, Emma. Don't act like this wasn't a choice. You made this choice. Over and over again. And now, you've got to deal with the consequences. I could feel my blood boiling. My fists clenched involuntarily. Shut up, Daniel. I snapped, turning on him. The shock of everything still hadn't worn off, but anger was quickly rising to take its place. This is between me and Emma. Stay out of it. Daniel smirked, unfazed. It's not just between you two anymore. It hasn't been for months, James. His words were like acid, burning every shred of trust one had left. I looked back at Emma, desperately trying to understand. Tell me, Emma, I said, my voice quiet but full of desperation. How long has this been going on? How long have you been seeing him? Her eyes welled up with tears, and she bit her lip as if trying to stop herself from breaking down completely. But she couldn't hold back anymore. For 6 months, she whispered. I'm so sorry. 6 months. The words felt like a dagger. 6 months of lies, of sneaking around behind my back. How could she have done this? How could she betray me like this after everything we had been through? I was at a loss for words, for feelings. Everything I had thought I knew about our marriage, the trust, the love, the foundation, was being shattered right before my eyes. And all I could do was stand there, helpless. The worst part was that I didn't even know what I was supposed to feel anymore. Was I angry? Yes, but I also felt something else. Something deeper. I felt betrayed in a way I couldn't explain, as though the woman I loved was suddenly a stranger to me. The woman who had promised to stand by my side, through thick and thin, was the very one who had shattered my world. I glanced at Daniel again, still standing there with that insufferable smirk on his face. You've been lying to me this entire time, haven't you? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. It just happened, James. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. But how could I believe her? How could I believe anything she said now? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced with 100 questions but no answers. No closure. And in that moment, I realized that I was standing at a crossroads. My life, the life I thought I knew, had just come crashing down, and I was left wondering where to go from here. Should I confront her? Should I end it all right now? Or was there still hope? The questions swirled in my mind, but one thing was clear. This night, this anniversary, would never be the same. It felt like the air around me had thickened, as if each breath I took was heavier than the last. I looked from Emma to Daniel, and back again, my mind trying to make sense of it all. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on my chest like a 1,000-pound stone, suffocating me with its sheer intensity. I couldn't believe it. 6 months. 6 months of lies, deception, and betrayal. How could she? How could Emma, the woman I had loved and trusted, do this to me? And Daniel, my so-called friend, the man I had trusted as a part of my inner circle. It was a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from, and it had just begun. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered. The pain, the anger, it was all swirling inside of me, churning like a storm I couldn't control. I was on the verge of losing everything. The woman I loved, my best friend, and the life I thought I had. But the more I tried to control my emotions, the more they slipped from my grasp. "You've lied to me for 6 months, Emma," I said finally, my voice hoarse with disbelief. 6 months, and you couldn't even tell me the truth? How could you keep this from me? How could you betray me like this? Emma took a step back, as if she couldn't bear to face me. Her face was flushed, tears streaking down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The words that I needed to hear, the apology, the regret, the explanation, seemed lost in the space between us. Daniel, who had been standing quietly in the background, finally stepped forward. His presence was like a dark cloud looming over everything. I couldn't stand the smugness in his expression, the casual way he was watching us. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even ashamed. "Don't look at her, James," Daniel said, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's not going to say what you want her to say. She's not going to fix this. You're wasting your time, my friend." I glared at him, anger flaring in my chest. "Don't call me your friend anymore, Daniel," I spat. "You've lost that privilege the moment you decided to sleep with my wife." Daniel chuckled, his laughter cold and uncaring. "Oh, you think this is about friendship, James? This is about something much bigger. Something neither of us can control anymore." He looked at Emma, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. "You never were the one for him. We both know that." My heart sank. The words stung like poison dripping into my veins. How could he say something so vile, something so hurtful? And why did it feel like he was enjoying watching me fall apart? I turned back to Emma, my heart aching with confusion. "Is that true?" I asked quietly. "Do you really feel that way, Emma? Is he right? Was I never the one for you?" Emma shook her head, her hands trembling. "No, James, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not like that. Love you. I always have. But something changed. I don't know how, but it did. I'm so sorry for what I've done, but I was lost. I couldn't talk to you about it. I thought you wouldn't understand." I blinked, trying to process her words. "Something changed," I repeated. "Is that your excuse? Something changed? You didn't think I would understand. How could you think that? We were supposed to be a team, Emma. We were supposed to face everything together." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at me, and she reached out as if to touch me, but I instinctively stepped back. "I didn't mean for it to happen, James. I swear," she pleaded. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this wasn't as bad as it seemed. I wanted to think that deep down she still loved me and that this was just some kind of horrible misunderstanding. But the truth, the cold, hard truth, was that she had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. She had made a choice, and so had Daniel. And yet, even with everything inside me screaming for her to stay away, A part of me still felt that faint, lingering hope. That hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. But I couldn't see how. I couldn't see how anything could ever be the same again. I turned away from them, my head spinning. The weight of the situation was crushing me, and I needed space. I needed time to think, to process everything. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with anger and pain. The love of my life had just torn apart everything I thought I knew. "I need some time," I said quietly, barely recognizing the sound of my own voice. "I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do." Emma's voice cracked as she called out to me, "James, please don't leave me. Please." But it was too late. I couldn't stay there. Not when everything felt like a lie. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. And so, without another word, I walked out of the room. I left behind the woman I had loved, the man I had called my friend, and the life I thought we had built together. All of it was gone. All of it was shattered. As I stepped into the hallway, I could hear Emma's desperate sobs behind me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The next few days were a blur. The silence between Emma and me was deafening, and every corner of our house seemed to echo with the weight of unspoken words. I barely slept, tossing and turning through the nights, haunted by the image of her and Daniel together. The trust one had once placed in both of them felt like a cruel joke. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. I tried to stay busy, working late, keeping my mind occupied, but there was no escape from the emptiness at home. The place that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. I kept my distance from Emma, avoiding eye contact, barely acknowledging her presence. Every time I saw her, it was like a sharp stab to my chest. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had shared everything with, was now the stranger standing in the same room. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, her presence weighed on me, and I found myself wondering if I would ever look at her the same way again. Every small interaction was laced with a thick layer of bitterness, and every time I spoke, it felt like the words were heavy with disdain. For days we didn't speak. And when we did, it was only out of necessity. There was no warmth in our conversations, no connection. It felt like we were strangers passing through each other's lives. I could see the sadness in her eyes every time we crossed paths, and the guilt was almost unbearable. But I wasn't ready to forgive. I wasn't ready to pretend that everything was okay when my heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces. The days dragged on, and the distance between us grew. I spent hours staring at the wall, wondering if things would ever go back to how they were, or if I was simply lying to myself, holding on to something that had long been broken. Emma, too, seemed lost, as though she was waiting for some kind of miracle to mend the rift between us. One evening, I was sitting in the living room trying to focus on a book, when I heard Emma's soft footsteps approaching. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me without saying a word. Her presence was almost suffocating, yet I couldn't bring myself to ask her to leave. I didn't know if I wanted her to stay or if I just didn't have the energy to confront the truth any longer. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaky and filled with regret. "I know I've ruined everything. I can't undo what's been done, but I want to try. I want to fix this." I didn't look up at her. I kept my gaze fixed on the book in my hands, trying to ignore the heavy emotions swirling inside of me. "I don't know how to fix this," I replied, my voice low and weary. "I don't even know if I want to." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Please, James, don't say that. Please don't give up on us." I finally looked up at her, my eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and anger. "You gave up on us the moment you chose him over me, Emma. What makes you think I can just forgive that?" She took a hesitant step toward me, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't. I never meant to hurt you. I don't even know how it happened. It just did." "But it did happen," I said bitterly. "And I have to live with that now. You have to live with that." I could see the tears forming in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not yet. The pain was still too fresh, too raw. I needed time. I needed space to figure out what I wanted, and if there was even a possibility of salvaging anything from the wreckage of our marriage. James, I love you, she said, her voice breaking. Please don't let this destroy us. We've been through so much together. We can make it through this too. Her words echoed in my mind, but they didn't bring the comfort I thought they would. They felt hollow, empty. I didn't know if love was enough to fix what had been broken. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. Love isn't enough when trust is gone, I whispered, almost to myself. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the weight of my words hanging between us like a heavy fog. Emma stood there, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with sobs. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Couldn't bring myself to say the words that would make it all okay. I'll give you time, James, she finally said, her voice barely audible. I won't force you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove it. I nodded slowly, but the words didn't reach me. There was nothing she could do or say that would take away the pain, nothing that would erase the betrayal. The damage had been done, and I was left to pick up the broken pieces of a life I no longer recognized. I watched as Emma turned and walked away, her steps heavy with the weight of her guilt. As she disappeared down the hallway, I sank into the couch, my hands covering my face. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating in the flood of emotions that threatened to consume me. How could everything go so wrong? The following days were a blur of confusion and torment. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt like a hollow shell. Every corner I turned, every room I entered, was a reminder of the betrayal. Emma's face was a constant presence, but it was no longer the face of the woman I had married. It was the face of someone I didn't recognize, someone I couldn't trust. I spent most of my time at work, hoping the hours would pass faster and the pain would fade. But no matter how many meetings I sat through or emails I replied to, the haunting thought of what had happened stayed with me. It was as if it was written on the walls of my mind, replaying in an endless loop. I kept thinking about how much we had built together, how we had supported each other through thick and thin. We were supposed to be partners for life, and yet here I was, questioning everything I thought I knew about her, about us. That Friday, Emma invited me to dinner, hoping for some kind of resolution. She said she wanted to talk, but I wasn't sure I was ready to hear anything she had to say. Still, I couldn't bring myself to decline. I agreed, not knowing what would come of it, but hoping somehow that the conversation might bring the clarity I so desperately needed. We met at a small, intimate restaurant we used to visit often. It was one of those places that held sentimental value for both of us, yet now it felt foreign and uncomfortable. When I arrived, Emma was already there, sitting by the window, her hands nervously fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. When she saw me approach, her eyes lit up for a brief second, but the smile that followed was strained. It wasn't the smile I was used to seeing, the one that had always made me feel at ease. It was a smile that was hiding something, a smile that felt like a mask. I sat down across from her, the space between us feeling larger than it had ever been before. The silence was deafening as the waiter brought over our drinks, and we both sipped our wine without saying a word. I could feel the weight of the conversation hanging in the air, but neither of us was brave enough to start it. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. James, I know I've hurt you, and I know words can't take back what I've done, but please just let me explain. I wanted to tell her that I didn't want to hear it, that the explanation was meaningless now. But I couldn't. Instead, I simply nodded, waiting for the words I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. I never meant for any of this to happen, she began, her hands trembling as she reached for her glass. It was never about you. It was about me and the mistakes I made. I raised an eyebrow. Mistakes? Emma, what do you mean by that? She took a deep breath, her eyes darting to the floor before meeting mine again. I don't know how it started, James. I didn't want it to happen. But when when we began talking more, I felt like I was finally being seen again. It wasn't about love at first. It was just someone who listened to me, who cared about what I was going through. I leaned back in my chair, the words piercing my heart. So, you went to him because I wasn't listening. Because I wasn't good enough for you. No, that's not it, she said quickly, shaking her head. It wasn't about that. But I had been feeling so alone, so disconnected for months. I tried to tell you, but you were always so busy with work, and I felt like I was losing you. I was silent for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. The guilt in her voice was clear, but it didn't make the betrayal any less painful. So, you chose to betray me instead of talking to me. Instead of working through it together. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, tears starting to well in her eyes. I was stupid. I was selfish, and I didn't know how to fix things. I just kept going down this path, thinking it would make me feel better. But it only made things worse. I lost myself, and I almost lost you too. The truth hit me like a wave, crashing over everything I thought I knew about us. Emma wasn't the woman I thought she was. She wasn't the perfect wife I had always believed her to be. She had been hiding behind a mask of happiness, pretending that everything was okay when, in reality, she had been drowning in her own insecurities. And now the damage was done. I couldn't erase the images in my mind, the sound of her whispers to Daniel, the way she had betrayed me. I looked at her, my heart torn between anger and sorrow. Emma, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. I don't know if I can look at you the same way again. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it on mine. Please, James, don't give up on us. I know I've ruined everything, but I love you. Sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. I pulled my hand away, feeling the cold sting of her touch. You can't undo what you've done, Emma. You can't just erase the pain, the betrayal. It's not that easy. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. No. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But please just know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll be patient. I'll wait for you to trust me again. I sat there, my heart heavy with uncertainty. Could I ever forgive her? Could I ever trust her again after everything she had done? The future seemed so unclear, and yet part of me wanted to believe that we could rebuild what had been broken. But the road to healing was going to be long and difficult. And right now, I wasn't sure if I was ready for that journey. The days after that dinner with Emma felt like a blur of conflicting emotions. I had wanted answers, but now that I had them, they left me with more questions. How was I supposed to rebuild my life with the woman who had betrayed me so deeply? Was forgiveness even possible? Or had she shattered the foundation of everything we had built together? At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the images that haunted my mind. The images of Emma and Daniel together, the stolen moments that should have been ours. It was almost unbearable. But I couldn't stop myself from thinking about it, and the anger simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of what had happened. Emma tried her best to act as though nothing had changed, but we both knew it had. The dynamic between us had shifted. Every word she spoke, every gesture, seemed like a thinly veiled attempt to convince me that she hadn't ruined everything. But the trust that once existed between us was gone, and no amount of tears or promises could bring it back. I watched her as she went about her daily routine, making breakfast, tidying up the house, talking to me as though we were just two people living together. But I could feel the distance. There was a space between us now that hadn't existed before. I could no longer see her the same way, and I wasn't sure if I ever could again. I tried to avoid the subject of Daniel, but it was impossible. Every time she mentioned his name, it felt like a knife to the heart. She would talk about how he was just a friend, how she had never intended for things to go as far as they had, but the lies had already been exposed. And I could no longer look at her and believe her words. One afternoon I came home early from work, hoping to find some peace. I entered the house quietly, but as I passed the living room, I noticed Emma sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. Her expression was one I hadn't seen before. Strange, almost guilty. I stood there for a moment, watching her, unsure of what to do next. Before I could ask her what was going on, she looked up at me, her face pale. "James, we need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know if I was ready for another conversation about our broken relationship, but I had no choice. I nodded and sat down beside her. the air between us thick with tension. "I've been thinking a lot," Emma began, her voice shaky. "About everything. About how I've hurt you and how much I've destroyed. I know I can't take back what I've done, but I want to try and fix things. I want to prove to you that I'm still the woman you married." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to shout at her, to tell her that nothing could fix the damage she had done. But another part of me still cared for her. I wanted to believe in her, in us, but it was so hard to find that hope again. "Emma," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't just erase what happened. You can't just say a few words and make everything go back to the way it was." She looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumping. "No. But I want to try. Please, James, let me prove it to you. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I just want you to know that I'm willing to work on this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." I sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Could I give her another chance? Could I ever look at her the same way again? The truth was, I didn't know. But what I did know was that the pain of betrayal was still fresh, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to put myself through that again. But Emma wasn't giving up. She wasn't going to stop trying to make things right. Every day she would do small things, helping with chores, bringing me coffee in the morning, even trying to recreate the intimacy we once had. It was as if she was trying to convince herself that everything was okay, trying to believe that we could go back to the way we were. And yet, no matter what she did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The love we had felt so real at one point, so strong and unbreakable. But now it felt fragile, as if it could shatter with the slightest touch. One evening after dinner, Emma sat down next to me on the couch. "James, I know I've ruined everything," she said softly. "But I want to work for us. I want to earn back your trust, even if it takes years. Please give me a chance." I turned to face her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. But I couldn't help but wonder, was I just lying to myself by holding on? Could I really rebuild something that had been broken so completely? "Emma," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I don't know if I can ever forgive you." She didn't say anything, but the tears in her eyes spoke louder than words ever could. She didn't try to convince me further. Instead, she sat there quietly, waiting for me to make the decision. As the days went by, the weight of Emma's words kept pressing on me. Could I really forgive her? Could I rebuild a life with someone who had betrayed my trust in such a profound way? It wasn't just the affair itself that haunted me, but the fact that Emma had kept it a secret for so long. The lies had been woven into the fabric of our relationship, and now that they were exposed, it felt like the very foundation of our marriage had been shaken. I spent days in turmoil, torn between the love I still felt for Emma and the hurt that consumed me. The good memories, the ones that had once brought me so much joy, now felt tainted. Every time I tried to recall a happy moment, it was overshadowed by the thought of her with Daniel, smiling, laughing, sharing intimate moments that should have been mine. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep torturing myself with the past. The decision to move on wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't continue to hold on to a relationship that had been broken beyond repair. I had to let go, even if it meant losing the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. It was a cold, rainy evening when I finally made up my mind. I came home from work, my thoughts clouded with doubt, when I found Emma sitting at the kitchen table. She looked up at me, her eyes tired but hopeful, as if she was waiting for me to make a decision. "James," she said, her voice soft, "we need to talk. I know things haven't been easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Just tell me what you need, and I'll give it to you." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they made me feel more distant than ever. The more she tried to fix things, the more I realized that there was no going back. The love we once shared was no longer the same. It had been tainted by betrayal, and no amount of effort on her part could erase that stain. I sat down across from her, my heart heavy with the decision I was about to make. I had been avoiding this conversation for so long, hoping that time would heal the wounds, but deep down I knew the truth. Our marriage was over. It wasn't something I wanted, but it was something I had to accept. Emma, I said, my voice breaking, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. The trust is gone. The love we had. It's not the same anymore. Emma's face crumpled in disbelief. James, please don't say that. I know I've hurt you, but I'm still here. I'm still willing to fight for us. Please don't give up on me. Her words stung, but I knew in my heart that they were only words. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was no longer real. I can't, Emma. I can't keep living in the past. Have to move on. For my own peace of mind. And for my own future. The silence between us was deafening. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but there was no going back. I had made my decision. It wasn't easy. Letting go of someone you once loved with all your heart never is. But as much as I cared for Emma, I knew I had to take control of my life again. I couldn't let her betrayal define who I was or what I wanted in life. I had to rebuild myself, to heal from the wounds that had been inflicted on me. The next few weeks were filled with a kind of emotional numbness. I moved out of our shared home and into a small apartment, a temporary place where I could escape from the memories that seemed to cling to every corner of the house I had once called home. I kept busy with work, trying to avoid the reality of what had happened, but the pain was still there. It was always there, lurking beneath the surface. One night, as I sat in my new apartment, sipping on a glass of whiskey, I thought about Emma. I thought about all the good times we had shared, all the laughter and love that once filled our lives. But I also thought about the betrayal, the lies, and the feeling of being completely alone in a relationship that was supposed to be my safe place. And in that moment I realized that I was finally free. Free from the lies, free from the pain, and free from a love that no longer existed. It was time for me to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk. As I sat there, the rain tapping softly against the window, I made a vow to myself. I would never let anyone hurt me like this again. I would never allow myself to become so vulnerable again. I would find my strength, my peace, and my happiness, even if I had to do it alone. Days turned into weeks, and while the initial pain of Emma's betrayal had lessened, there were moments when it still felt like a sharp wound that hadn't quite healed. I was trying to find a new rhythm in my life, to fill the void that Emma had once occupied. But despite my efforts, there were still reminders everywhere. The memories, the quiet spaces, and even the scent of the house. All of it lingered. It wasn't until one late afternoon that I ran into someone who changed everything. I was at a cafe I frequented before, the one that Emma and I used to visit every weekend. The familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and the warm glow of the space made me pause as soon as I stepped inside. It felt like a piece of my past that I wasn't quite ready to face yet. I ordered my coffee to go, hoping to avoid any emotional overload. As I turned to leave, a voice stopped me in my tracks. James. I turned around to see a face that I hadn't expected to see. A face I hadn't even thought about in years. It was Sarah, an old friend of mine from college. We hadn't spoken since graduation, and the years had softened the edges of her features, but there was no mistaking who she was. Sarah, I said, surprised to see her. Wow, it's been ages. How have you been? Her smile was warm, but there was something more behind it. A recognition, an understanding that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I've been good. Life, you know. And you? She paused, her eyes glancing at me with a hint of curiosity. You look different. I could hear the unspoken question in her voice. Different, yes. Change. The man who had walked in here months ago would never have looked the way I felt now. I had lost something in the last few months. A part of me, my innocence perhaps, my trust. I wasn't the same James the first had been when Emma and I were living our perfect life. I've been going through some stuff, I said, forcing a small smile. But I'm working through it. It's been tough, but I'm getting by. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a story I'd like to hear. I couldn't help but chuckle at her response. Sarah had always been the one who would listen without judgment, without trying to fix things. She was someone who just understood. And, for the first time in a while, I found myself wanting to talk, to unload. Maybe we can grab a drink sometime and catch up properly. I suggested. She nodded, and we exchanged numbers before parting ways. I wasn't sure what had drawn me to her, but something about seeing Sarah again, someone who had been a part of my life before Emma, before everything went sideways, felt comforting. There was no baggage with her. No history of betrayal or deceit. Over the next few weeks, we met a couple of times for drinks. At first, it was just casual, catching up on life, talking about our jobs, the city, mutual friends we hadn't seen in years. But with every conversation, I found myself opening up more. There was something about Sarah's presence that made it easier to talk. She didn't pressure me. She just listened. One evening, after a particularly long conversation, we walked through the city together. The night air cool and crisp. I had started to feel a shift inside me. A subtle change. The anger and sadness that had been my constant companions for so long were beginning to dull, replaced by a quiet curiosity. Could I be ready to let someone in again? James, Sarah said, breaking the silence, I can't pretend to know what you're going through, but I do know this. You deserve to be happy. You deserve peace. I looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes striking me in a way I hadn't expected. No one had spoken to me like that in a long time, certainly not Emma, who had always deflected or made excuses. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly happy again, I replied, my voice quieter now. I keep thinking about Emma. About what we had. And then I remember how it all ended, and it just hurts too much. Sarah placed a gentle hand on my arm. Her touch unexpected but warm. You'll heal, James. In your own time. But you can't keep punishing yourself. You have to let go of the past if you want any chance at happiness in the future. Her words lingered in my mind long after our conversation ended. I knew she was right. I couldn't keep holding on to the pain, especially when it felt like it was strangling me. But letting go of Emma, letting go of everything we'd built, it was so much harder than I had imagined. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about Sarah again. There was something about her that pulled me in. She was kind, gentle, understanding. But most of all, she didn't remind me of my broken past. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was just offering a listening ear and a kind heart. Could this be the start of something new? Was I ready to move on? The truth was, I didn't know. But as I drifted off to sleep, I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't consumed by thoughts of Emma. I wasn't drowning in the memories of our shattered marriage. I was finally looking forward, even if just a little. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward healing. As days turned into weeks, the void left by Emma's absence lingered like an unspoken truth between Sarah and me. Our conversations had deepened. We shared more than just casual updates on our lives. There were moments when it felt like we were on the verge of something more, something real. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. Emma's betrayal still stung every time I thought about it. It was like a scar that hadn't fully healed. One evening, Sarah invited me over to her apartment for dinner. She had been a great listener, and I had grown to appreciate her company. That night, I tried my best to push aside the emotional weight of my past, but it was hard. Every time I looked at Sarah, I couldn't help but think about what had happened with Emma. Was I even capable of trusting anyone again? I made your favorite, Sarah said as she placed a dish of pasta on the table. Her smile was genuine, but her eyes, there was something in them that seemed more serious than usual. I thought we could talk about your next steps. You've been through a lot, and I think it's time for you to think about what you want for yourself. Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was as if she could see through the layers of my carefully constructed mask. I knew she was right. I had been avoiding facing the truth about what I really wanted. For so long, my life had revolved around Emma and the dream of a perfect marriage. Now, the reality of what had happened between us was a heavy burden I couldn't escape. I don't know what I want anymore, I confessed, taking a deep breath. I've been lost. My whole life, everything I thought I knew turned upside down. It's hard to imagine a future when the past feels like it's still right in front of me. Sarah paused, then gently placed her hand on mine. James, it's okay. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. But don't keep punishing yourself. You deserve a future that's not tainted by the past. I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But a part of me still held on to the memories of Emma, the love, the promise of forever, and the betrayal that had shattered it all. Was I really ready to move on? Or was I just using Sarah's presence as a temporary distraction? As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I noticed something strange. There was a brief flash of light from Sarah's phone, which was sitting on the table between us. She didn't pick it up, but I could see the screen lit up. It wasn't just one message. It was several. I couldn't make out the words, but the fact that she was getting so many messages from someone made my curiosity flare. It wasn't like me to invade someone's privacy, but my gut twisted in a way that I couldn't explain. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly felt uneasy. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed my discomfort. Sarah quickly glanced at her phone and then back at me, a fleeting look of panic crossing her face. She quickly swiped the screen and placed the phone face down, a little too quickly for my liking. Her eyes met mine, and she gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just some work stuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude." But there was something in the way she said it, something that didn't sit right with me. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was just overthinking. After all, Sarah had always been kind to me, always supportive. But that moment, the brief flash of hesitation, lingered in my mind long after I left her apartment that night. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My mind raced, replaying the brief moment when Sarah had acted strangely, when she'd quickly hidden her phone and brushed off my question. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that maybe I was just paranoid after everything that had happened with Emma. But deep down, a nagging feeling told me otherwise. The next few days were a blur of thoughts and emotions. I tried to focus on work, tried to move forward, but it wasn't easy. Every interaction with Sarah felt different now. I couldn't help but notice the little things. The way she always seemed to be looking at her phone, the subtle tension in her voice when we talked about anything too personal. It was as if she was hiding something from me. But what could it be? Could it really be that Sarah, the woman who had been my rock during this whole ordeal, was hiding something from me? Seemed impossible. She had been nothing but supportive, listening to my heartbreak and offering comfort when I needed it most. But now, a part of me started to question everything. Was there more to this than I realized? I knew that trust was a fragile thing, especially after everything I'd been through with Emma. The betrayal I had experienced still lingered in my mind, a shadow that refused to leave. Was I simply projecting my doubts onto Sarah? Or was there something more to her behavior that I wasn't seeing? The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. The messages on her phone, the way she'd quickly hidden it when I asked about them. It wasn't just a coincidence. I had to find out what was going on, even if it meant confronting her about it. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to accuse her without knowing the truth. I didn't want to make the same mistake I had made with Emma, assuming the worst without any real evidence. So, I decided to take a step back and observe, to see if I could uncover the truth on my own. The next time I saw Sarah, I tried to act normal, to mask the growing suspicion that had taken root in my mind. But I couldn't help it. My eyes kept darting to her phone, watching for any signs of her acting strange again. I tried to focus on what she was saying, but all I could think about was the mystery she had become. Then, as we sat in a cafe later that week, I saw it again. Sarah's phone buzzed on the table, and she quickly reached for it, her fingers moving faster than usual. She glanced at the screen and then looked up at me, a smile plastered on her face. But it didn't reach her eyes. "Just some work stuff," she said, her voice a little too forced. I couldn't help myself. The suspicion that had been building inside me bubbled to the surface. "Who's texting you so much? Is it someone important?" Her smile faltered for a moment, and I saw her swallow nervously. But then she quickly recovered. "It's nothing, James. Really, don't worry about it." But her answer didn't reassure me. If anything, it only deepened my concern. The more she tried to downplay it, the more convinced I became that something was going on. I didn't want to push her too hard, but I knew that I couldn't let this go. Not after everything I had been through with Emma. I had to know the truth. The days following that strange evening with Sarah's behavior felt like an eternity. First, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just stressed, maybe work was getting to her, or perhaps it was a phase. But deep down I knew something was wrong. I could feel the distance growing between us. It wasn't just the physical space, but the emotional disconnect that haunted me. Every time I looked into her eyes, I saw something different. A coldness, a lack of the warmth that had once made her the center of my world. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was projecting my past fears onto her. Fears that had been born from the betrayal I'd faced before. But the more time passed, the more I realized that I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. It wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was something that had taken root deep inside of me, gnawing at me day in and day out. Sarah wasn't the woman I had married anymore. She wasn't the woman who used to laugh at my bad jokes or spend hours talking about our dreams. Now she seemed distant, withdrawn. I could feel the wall between us growing taller, brick by brick, every time I tried to reach out to her. I would ask her about her day, and her answers were always short, almost too rehearsed. When I tried to touch her, she would pull away just a little too fast, or seem preoccupied, lost in thoughts that I didn't understand. But it wasn't just that. It was her phone. First, I told myself I was being ridiculous. It's just a phone after all. But then it became more than just a phone. Every time Sarah received a text, there was this tension in the air. She would glance at it quickly and then pocket it, almost as if she was hiding something. The little things, the nuances of her behavior, began to build up like a dam, and I was left standing there, unsure whether I should break it or let it collapse on its own. I tried to push the thought out of my mind. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Maybe Sarah was going through something I didn't know about. But there was no denying the changes in her demeanor. She didn't share her thoughts with me anymore. She didn't talk about her day in the way she used to. I had no idea what was going on in her mind, and the uncertainty was eating me alive. The more I watched her, the more I started to notice things that didn't add up. She started going out more often, not for work or any clear reason. She would tell me she was meeting friends, but the details never felt right. When I asked about it, she would brush me off, her face flushed with something that felt like guilt. And then there were the late-night phone calls, the ones where she would leave the room to answer. It wasn't like Sarah to keep secrets, at least not from me. I always believed in our open communication, in the honesty that was the foundation of our relationship. But now, that honesty felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't catch it fast enough. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid, that maybe she just needed space or that her friendships were growing, and I was too possessive or insecure. But every time I looked at her, I felt like there was a mask she was wearing, one that I could no longer see through. The woman I had known, the one I had trusted with everything, was fading away, and in her place was someone I didn't recognize. But then there were the moments that cut right through me. The sudden glances, the moments when her phone would buzz and she would look at it, quickly hiding the screen from my view. I started to wonder if I was just imagining things, or if there was something deeper going on. My mind would race through every possible scenario, every possibility. Could it be that she was seeing someone else? Could it be that she was hiding an affair? The thoughts were too much to bear, but they kept coming. I tried to ignore it, tried to let it go. But every time she wasn't around, the doubts would take over. I would catch myself looking at her phone, or replaying the conversations we had, looking for a clue, something to confirm my suspicions. But there was nothing concrete. There was nothing that screamed cheating or betrayal. And yet, the feeling lingered, stronger than ever. I couldn't help but think that maybe my instincts were trying to tell me something, that deep down I already knew the answer. But if I was wrong, if I was just imagining things, then how could I possibly confront her? How could I accuse the woman I loved of something so terrible, based on nothing but my own fears and doubts? And yet, every time I looked at Sarah, Every time I saw her glance at her phone or catch her in a lie, I couldn't help but wonder, what if I was right? What if she was hiding something from me? What if my worst fears were about to come true? The thought haunted me, and I realized I couldn't keep ignoring it any longer. Had to know. I had to find out what was really going on. But how? How could I uncover the truth without completely destroying the fragile trust that still existed between us? It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon that everything changed. I had spent the morning pacing around the house, trying to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but it was no use. The more I tried to distract myself, the more my mind would wander back to the nagging suspicion gnawing at me. And then it happened. Sarah had left the house to run some errands, or so she said. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine absent-mindedly, when the phone rang. It was her phone, lying on the kitchen counter, left behind as she rushed out. I froze for a moment, unsure whether I should ignore it or pick it up. The temptation to know was too strong, too overwhelming to resist. My heart was pounding as I grabbed the phone and unlocked it. I don't know what I expected to find, but what I saw made my stomach drop. There was a message, but it wasn't from one of her friends. It wasn't even from a colleague. The name on the screen sent a chill down my spine, Daniel. My hands trembled as I read the message, heart racing with each word. I can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you so much. Don't worry, we'll find a way to be together soon. My mind went blank. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the floor had just dropped out beneath me. I had been preparing myself for something, anything, but I hadn't prepared for this. The words were clear. The message was unmistakable. Sarah, my wife, had been seeing someone else. Not just any someone, but a man named Daniel. And they were talking about meeting tonight like it was an ordinary thing. I couldn't believe it. How could she? After everything we had been through, how could she betray me like this? I had trusted her completely. I had believed in the vows we made, the promises she had whispered in my ear on our wedding day. But now those promises felt like lies. The love I thought we shared felt like a distant memory, tainted by the reality of what was unfolding before my eyes. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, tried to make sense of what was happening, but it felt like I was drowning in a sea of confusion and hurt. How long had this been going on? How could she hide something like this from me? Was it just a one-time thing, or had it been going on for months? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. Suddenly, the sound of the front door opening broke through my haze of thoughts. Sarah was back. My heart leapt into my throat as I quickly shoved the phone back into its place, praying she hadn't noticed anything. I didn't know what I was going to do. Confront her. What could I possibly say? The words felt too heavy to speak. She walked into the living room with a smile, as if everything was perfectly normal. She didn't seem to notice the tension in the air, or maybe she did, but she was too skilled at hiding it. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked casually, as though nothing had changed. I could barely bring myself to look at her. All I could think about was the message on her phone, the words that still echoed in my mind. But I couldn't confront her yet. Not like this, not in the middle of her lie. I needed time to process everything, to figure out what to do next. "Fine," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. "How about yours?" "Oh, just the usual," Sarah said, walking into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. She seemed completely unaffected, completely unaware that I had just discovered the worst thing I could have imagined. I watched her for a moment, trying to piece everything together. She looked the same as she always did. Beautiful, composed, calm. But I knew now. I knew what she had been hiding, and it was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was a stranger to me now. I didn't know what to do, where to go from here. The evidence was right in front of me, but confronting Sarah without knowing the full truth felt like it would be the biggest mistake of all. So, I did the only thing I could think to do in that moment. I pretended. I pretended that everything was fine, that I hadn't just uncovered her secret. But inside I was a mess. I could feel the anger building inside me, the betrayal, the hurt. How could she do this to me? How could she make a fool of me like this? The anger surged through me like a tidal wave, but I kept it contained, burying it deep inside where no one could see it. For now I would stay silent. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living this lie. I would find out the truth, no matter what it took. The next time she left, I would follow her. I had to know where she was going, what she was doing. Because if she thought she could get away with this, she was in for a rude awakening. The next few days felt like an endless nightmare. I tried to keep my composure around Sarah, pretending everything was fine, but inside I was unraveling. Every time she smiled at me, every time she held my hand or kissed me goodbye, I couldn't stop the overwhelming urge to tear everything apart and confront her. But I didn't. Not yet. I had to know more before I said anything. Had to be sure. The message on her phone still haunted me. I can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you so much. Who was this Daniel? Was he someone from her past? Or had this affair been going on for a while? I couldn't stop obsessing over it. Couldn't stop the torrent of questions rushing through my mind. My trust in her had shattered, and I couldn't stand the thought of not knowing everything. I had to take control of the situation. I needed answers. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I started following her. First it was small things, nothing too drastic. I'd casually ask her what she was doing that day, and if her answer seemed suspicious, I'd find a way to confirm it. First she was careful. She was always vague about her plans, never giving me too many details. But I didn't need many. I was beginning to notice the little things, her late-night phone calls, her texts that were always short and to the point, and the times when she would rush out of the house for no reason, always with some vague excuse. I began to keep track of her movements. One Saturday, when she said she was going out to meet a friend for lunch, I decided to follow her. I wasn't sure where she was going, but my instincts told me something wasn't right. I waited until she left the house and then I slipped out behind her, staying a safe distance away so she wouldn't notice. It didn't take long before I saw where she was going. She pulled into a parking lot of a cafe I'd never seen before. A small, quaint little place tucked away in a corner of town. It wasn't a place she would usually go, especially not for lunch. I watched her walk inside and I felt my heart racing. My stomach churned with anxiety and anger. What was she doing here? I couldn't go inside and confront her. Not yet. I had to be patient. So I waited. I watched from my car, my eyes fixed on the cafe's entrance. And then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw him. Daniel. He walked out of the cafe, laughing as he talked on the phone, his hand resting casually on Sarah's shoulder. They didn't look like friends. No, they looked like something else, something much more intimate. Sarah was laughing too, a genuine laugh that I hadn't heard in months. She was comfortable with him, at ease in a way she never was with me anymore. The way they stood so close, the way he touched her arm, the way she leaned into him as they talked, it all made my blood run cold. It was exactly what I had feared, and more. My wife, the woman I had married and built a life with, had found someone else. And they weren't just talking. They were comfortable. They were intimate. She was with him and he was with her. I watched them for what seemed like an eternity, frozen in place as I tried to process everything. The man I had seen in the text messages, the one she had been seeing behind my back, was real. And he was standing right there, touching her like he had every right to. For a moment I felt numb. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Everything I had ever known felt like it was crumbling before my eyes. I had been right to be suspicious, but seeing it with my own eyes, seeing how she had so easily replaced me with someone else, it was like a punch to the gut. As Sarah and Daniel walked to his car, laughing and joking, I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. How could she? How could she betray me like this? How could she make a fool of me? I wanted to shout at her, demand answers right then and there, but I knew better. I couldn't let my emotions control me. Had to stay calm. I had to be smart about this. I watched them drive off together, and as their car disappeared from sight, I sat there, seething with rage. I had the proof I needed now. There was no more doubt. There was no more pretending. Sarah was having an affair with Daniel, and I had seen it with my own eyes. But that wasn't enough. I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't just move on with my life knowing what I knew. I needed more. I needed to confront her. But first I needed to know everything. Who was Daniel? What was their relationship? How long had this been going on? I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I had them all. I made up my mind then and there. This wasn't just going to be about finding out the truth. It was going to be about getting my revenge. Sarah thought she could get away with this, but she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her tear apart everything I had built. I was going to make her see what she had done, and make her regret every moment of it. The game had changed. And now it was my turn to take control. The next day felt like an eternity. I could barely focus on anything other than the image of Sarah and Daniel walking together, laughing, so comfortable in each other's company. That image was burned into my mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. It consumed me, filled me with a rage I could barely contain. I had spent years trusting Sarah. I had built a life with her, shared everything with her. And now, everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been shattered in an instant. The man she was with, Daniel, was no stranger. He was someone she had allowed into our lives, someone I had probably brushed shoulders with at some point, all the while he was slowly taking my place. But no more. I had been patient, I had gathered all the information I needed, and now I was ready to face her. I waited until late in the evening, hoping that by then she would be back home. I was anxious, my heart pounding in my chest, but I had made up my mind. I had to do this, not only to confront her but also to reclaim the power she had so easily stolen from me. I needed her to know that she couldn't just walk away from everything we'd built. When Sarah walked through the door, I was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV, pretending like I was engrossed in a show. She didn't notice me at first, slipping off her jacket and hanging it on the coat rack. She seemed calm, as if nothing was wrong, and for a moment, I almost wished that I had been wrong. That everything I had seen, everything I had felt, was a figment of my imagination. But deep down I knew I wasn't wrong. "Hey babe," Sarah called from the hallway, her voice light and casual. "How was your day?" I didn't answer her immediately. I let the silence hang between us for a few moments, just long enough for her to sense something was wrong. When she stepped into the living room, she froze. I was staring at her, and the look on my face must have told her everything. She knew. She knew that I knew what she had been doing behind my back. Her eyes widened, and a nervous laugh escaped her lips. "What's going on? You look different." "Different?" I repeated, my voice low and steady, but underneath it was an ocean of emotions. "You think you can just act like everything's fine? Like I haven't seen what I've seen?" Her face shifted. She couldn't hide the panic that was starting to show. She could feel the heat of my anger, and she knew she was running out of time to explain herself. I stood up from the couch and walked towards her. "I know about Daniel," I said, my voice calm, but every word felt like a sharp blade. "I know about the lies, the texts, the late-night meetings. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" Her face went pale. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to come up with a way to lie, to justify herself. But there was nothing left to hide. Already knew. And nothing she said could take away the pain she had caused. "No," she started to stammer, I don't know what you're talking about." I couldn't hold back anymore. The anger, the betrayal, it all came flooding out. "Don't lie to me," Sarah shouted. "Followed you. I saw you with him. I saw the way you looked at him. The way you touched him. Don't try to act innocent now." Her expression faltered. I had caught her in the act, and there was no way out. Her lips trembled, and I saw the guilt written all over her face. She couldn't deny it any longer. "Okay," she whispered, barely audible. "Okay, I've been seeing him. But it's not what you think. Not what I think." I interrupted, the hurt in my voice clear. "How could it not be what I think? I watched you, Sarah. I saw how you laughed with him. The way he touched you. You don't just do that with someone who's just a friend. Her eyes filled with tears. She stepped closer, her voice shaky. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear. But it just happened. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. Oh, it just happened, did it? You didn't want to hurt me, but you let someone else into our lives, into our bed. And now you expect me to just forgive you because it happened. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension. I could see the regret in her eyes, but I didn't care anymore. What was the point of forgiveness when the trust was gone? When everything we had was based on lies? I never meant to fall for him, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. It wasn't planned. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did, Sarah, I said, the words cutting through the air. You did. And now you have to face the consequences. She looked up at me, her face crumpling with emotion. Please, I'm so sorry. Please don't leave me. Love you. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to say something, to tell her I was going to give her a second chance, but I couldn't. The anger, the betrayal, it was too fresh, too raw. I couldn't pretend everything was okay. I couldn't just let her get away with it. Not when she had taken everything from me. I stood there, staring at her, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I had the power now. Had the choice. And I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her. I stood there, feeling the weight of the silence between us. Every word that had been said felt like a hammer hitting the foundation of our relationship, shattering it into pieces. Sarah's eyes were full of regret, but I couldn't bring myself to care. How could I? The person I had loved, trusted, and shared my life with had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I never wanted this, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, the tears streaming down her face. I never meant to hurt you. But the words fell flat. They didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. And now there was no going back. I can't believe you, Sarah, I said, my voice cold, the anger still seething under the surface. I gave you everything. I trusted you with my heart, my life, and you. You let him in. You threw it all away for some selfish fling. For what? A few stolen moments of excitement. She was shaking her head, pleading with me, but I couldn't hear it anymore. The pain of what she had done was too much, and the idea of forgiving her felt impossible. I had never imagined something like this happening. I thought our marriage was solid, built on trust and love. But now, all I saw were the lies, the deception, the hours she spent behind my back, pretending everything was normal while she was with him. Please don't leave me, Sarah begged, her voice rising in desperation. Love you. You're the one I've always wanted. Daniel, it was just a mistake. A mistake that I can't undo, but I promise I'll make it right. Please just give me a chance to fix it. My heart wrenched at her words, and for a brief moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was truly sorry, that everything could go back to the way it was. But deep down I knew that trust, once broken, was impossible to repair. The betrayal ran too deep, and the scars would never fully heal. I don't know if I can do that, I said, my voice cracking slightly as I looked away, trying to mask the vulnerability that was starting to creep in. You've already broken something that can never be fixed, Sarah. You've destroyed everything we had. She took a step toward me, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. Please don't say that. Please just listen to me. But I pulled my hand away. I couldn't bear to touch her. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was her lying, her betrayal, the intimacy she shared with another man. No, Sarah, I said firmly, shaking my head. This isn't something that can be fixed. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I had done nothing but comfort her for the past few years. I had been the one who supported her, believed in her, and trusted her without question. And now I was the one left broken. She sank to her knees in front of me, her sobs echoing through the room. I'm so sorry, she cried, her words barely intelligible through the tears. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please don't leave me. Please don't let this be the end. It was heartbreaking watching her like this. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, now reduced to a broken shell of herself. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the years of lies, the years of deceit. She had made her choice, and I had to live with it. "I need space, Sarah," I said, my voice firm despite the turmoil inside. "I can't look at you right now. I can't even begin to process everything. I need time to figure out what comes next." Her eyes widened in panic. "No, please don't. Don't leave me like this. We can fix this. We can work through it together." "I don't know if we can," I replied, my heart breaking even more as I said the words. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." With that, I turned away from her and walked toward the door. I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to get away from this house that once felt like a home, but now felt like a prison. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the decisions ahead of me. The future was uncertain, and every step I took felt like a leap into the unknown. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The cool night air felt strangely comforting against my flushed skin, but it couldn't clear the fog that clouded my mind. I paced in the yard, the silence of the night almost deafening. Every inch of me ached, not just physically but deep within my heart. The pain of betrayal was sharper than anything I had ever felt, and I couldn't escape it. I glanced back at the house, where Sarah's sobs still echoed in my mind. The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew, had shattered everything. The dream we had built together was gone in an instant, reduced to ashes by one foolish decision. How had I been so blind? But even as the anger burned inside me, another feeling lingered: guilt. The thought that I might be walking away from something salvageable haunted me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was nothing left to salvage. How could I ever look at her the same way again? How could I share a bed with someone who had betrayed me so deeply? I closed my eyes trying to clear my mind, but all I saw was Sarah. Her face full of guilt, her trembling hands begging me to stay, to forgive her. But it wasn't that simple. My heart ached for what could have been, for the life we might have had, but in reality, that life had already slipped through my fingers. And I had to let it go. "Daniel," I heard her voice call out from the doorway. It was weak, almost fragile, but I couldn't bear to turn around. I had heard enough. I had seen enough. The woman who had vowed to love me for the rest of our lives had torn our promises to shreds. And no amount of apologies could fix that. She came closer, her footsteps hesitant, as if she feared what I might do or say. But I was too lost in my own emotions to be concerned about her fear. "Daniel, please," she begged again, her voice barely a whisper. I felt a pang in my chest, a flicker of the love I once had for her. It hurt to see her like this, but I knew I had to stay strong. If I let myself break now, I would never recover. And this wasn't about me anymore. This was about my future. It was about finding peace, even if it meant leaving her behind. "I don't know what you want from me, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but cold. "What do you expect me to do? You've made your choice. You've crossed the line. There's nothing left for us here." Her breath caught in her throat, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes once again. "I didn't mean it, Daniel. I swear it was a mistake. I never thought I'd hurt you. Please, you have to believe me." "I believed you before," I replied, the bitterness in my voice sharper than I intended. "I trusted you. And that's what makes this so much worse. You betrayed me. And I can't just pretend like nothing happened." Her face crumpled in anguish, and she stepped forward, reaching for me. But this time I didn't pull her into my arms. I didn't offer her the comfort I once would have. I stood there, rigid, almost as if I were a different person entirely, someone who could no longer be swayed by the woman standing before me. "I need time to think," I said, turning away from her. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can't stay here right now. I need space." "I understand," she whispered, the words barely audible in the cold night air. But her voice cracked as she spoke them. "I just don't want to lose you, Daniel." And with that I walked away. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. I needed to escape, to find clarity, to breathe without the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. As I wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets, the thoughts that had been swirling in my mind seemed to settle, but they only revealed more confusion. What was I supposed to do now? Could I really leave her? Could I really walk away from the life we had built, even though it was crumbling before my eyes? I stopped at the edge of a park, staring into the dark expanse ahead of me. The decision was mine to make, but I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake. Could we find a way back from this? Was there any hope for us? Or had we reached the point of no return? And in that moment of uncertainty, a voice echoed in my head, almost as if it were an answer from within. You deserve better, Daniel. You deserve someone who will never betray you. Someone who will love you the way you've always loved her. The voice was strong and it gave me the clarity I needed. There was no turning back now. I had to move forward. The life I had with Sarah was over, and it was time to embrace the future. The following days felt like an eternity. The silence between Sarah and me was deafening. We both knew that something had irrevocably changed, but neither of us knew how to address it. The once vibrant conversations we shared were now replaced with awkward silences, each of us trying to avoid confronting the truth we both feared. I spent most of my time out of the house. Every moment I was away, I tried to clear my mind to figure out what I wanted. But the deeper I looked into myself, the more conflicted I became. I knew I had to make a decision: stay and try to salvage whatever remained of our marriage, or walk away and never look back. But every time I tried to imagine life without Sarah, something inside me recoiled. She was my wife, the woman I had promised to love and cherish. How could I just walk away from everything we had built together? Yet every time I came home I was met with that same cold atmosphere. There was no warmth between us anymore, no comfort in the routine we had once shared. It was as if we were both living in the shadow of the betrayal, unable to move forward. That evening, as I sat alone in the living room, my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Sarah walked in, her eyes swollen from crying, but she still managed a weak smile. I didn't return it. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky but determined. I looked up at her, not sure if I was ready for what she was about to say. But one thing was clear: our time had run out. We couldn't keep living in this limbo. There had to be an end to this chapter, and it was either going to be closure or something far worse. I motioned for her to sit down, but I remained standing, my posture rigid. I couldn't allow myself to soften, not yet. Not after everything she had done. "I don't know how to fix this, Daniel," she began, her voice filled with desperation. "I know I've hurt you and I'm so sorry. But please don't give up on me." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I almost believed her. Almost. But deep down I knew better. The damage had been done. And apologies, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't undo the hurt. "You can't fix this, Sarah," I said quietly, my voice heavy with finality. "You've already broken something that can't be repaired." Her face fell, her shoulders trembling as if my words had physically struck her. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but I held myself back. I had to stay strong. For me. For my sanity. "Is that it?" she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Are you just going to walk away?" I shook my head. "It's not about walking away, Sarah. It's about realizing that I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that things are normal when everything has changed. I can't ignore the truth anymore." She reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. "Please, Daniel. Please don't leave me." I didn't move. Couldn't. As much as my heart ached for her, I knew what I had to do. I had already made my decision, even if I couldn't quite bring myself to say it out loud. "I think it's time we separate," I said finally, the words feeling like they cut me to the bone. "Need space." "We both do." There was a long, painful silence. I could see the shock on her face, her disbelief, her hope that I might change my mind. But I knew this was the right choice. It was the only choice. "No," she gasped, shaking her head. "Please don't do this, Daniel. Love you. I swear I'll never do anything like that again. I'll make it right." But I couldn't let her words fool me again. I had believed in her once, and I had been shattered by her betrayal. I couldn't allow myself to fall into that trap again. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "But I can't stay." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, her tears falling freely now. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I knew that leaving was the only way for both of us to heal, to find our own paths forward, even if those paths didn't lead back to each other. The days that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, confusion, sadness, but above all, relief. It felt as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and yet I was not at peace. The decision to separate was made, but it didn't erase the years of love, the memories, and the trust one had once had in Sarah. It didn't make her betrayal easier to digest either. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far enough away that I could distance myself from the house we had shared for years. It felt surreal, almost like I was living in someone else's life. I spent most of my days working and trying to keep my mind occupied. I didn't have the luxury of time to dwell on the pain. I couldn't afford to. I had to keep moving forward. But no matter how busy I kept myself, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. I kept wondering if I had made the right decision. Was I too hasty? Should I have given her a second chance? But every time those thoughts crept into my mind, I reminded myself of the things I had seen, the secrets I had uncovered. Trust was something I could never get back. I told myself I wouldn't contact her unless absolutely necessary, but that didn't stop me from checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for a message, hoping for an apology, hoping that somehow we could go back to the way things were. But nothing came. The silence between us was deafening. It was as if Sarah had disappeared from my life completely, leaving only the echoes of her lies and betrayal. It was a cruel reminder that once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to repair. Weeks passed, and every day felt like an eternity. I kept replaying the events in my mind: the moment I found out about the affair, Sarah's confession, and my decision to walk away. I wondered how she was coping. Was she as devastated as I was, or was she already moving on? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I pushed those thoughts away. It wasn't my problem anymore. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be Sarah? Had she finally reached out? Hesitantly, I opened the message, half expecting it to be another apology, another plea for reconciliation. But the message was not from Sarah. It was from someone I didn't know. The message was short, simple, but it hit me like a slap in the face. "I know what happened. I have something you need to see. Meet me." My blood ran cold. Who was this person? How did they know about Sarah's affair? And why were they reaching out to me now, months after everything had ended? For a moment, I considered ignoring the message. I had already made peace with the separation, hadn't I? I didn't need any more drama in my life. But curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what this person knew, and what they were going to show me. I replied, setting up a meeting at a nearby cafe. I didn't know what to expect, but I felt the familiar sense of dread creeping back into my chest. I had promised myself I was done with this part of my life, but now it seemed like the past wasn't finished with me. I showed up early, my mind racing with possibilities. Who could it be? What did they know? And why were they reaching out to me? Was it someone who had been involved in the affair, or someone else who had been hurt by it? The cafe was quiet, and I took a seat in the corner, my eyes scanning the room, looking for anyone who might be watching me. After a few minutes, a figure appeared in the doorway, a man in his mid-30s, with short dark hair and an expression that was hard to read. He was wearing a black jacket, and his eyes immediately locked onto mine as he approached. "Daniel?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Who are you? And what do you know about Sarah?" The man didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times before sliding it across the table to me. I hesitated before picking it up. On the screen was a series of photos of Sarah and another man, someone I didn't recognize, meeting at a hotel, laughing, holding hands. The images were intimate, and they hit me harder than I expected. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man leaned in slightly, his eyes scanning the room before speaking. "His name is Alex. He's the one she was seeing. I have more pictures, more evidence. I think you deserve to know the whole truth." I looked at the photos again, my stomach churning. This wasn't just an affair. It was something deeper, something far worse than I had ever imagined. I put the phone down slowly, trying to process what I had just seen. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why now?" The man looked at me for a moment before speaking. "Because you deserve to know the full story. Sarah lied to you, but there's more to this. I'm trying to make sure you get the closure you need." Felt numb. The weight of the photos, of the truth I had just uncovered, was more than I could handle in that moment. I wanted to scream, to confront Sarah, but I knew I couldn't. The damage had been done. For a long moment we sat there in silence. My mind raced, and my heart pounded in my chest. I had thought I knew everything, that I had already moved on, but this was a whole new level of betrayal. I had never imagined that the lies Sarah had told me would run so deep. But now I knew. I knew everything. And there was no turning back. The weight of the truth settled heavily on my chest. The man who had shown me the pictures sat across from me, watching me closely. His eyes, though filled with a quiet sympathy, didn't offer me much comfort. The truth was harsh, raw, and more painful than anything I had anticipated. I felt like I was suffocating, the walls closing in around me. I couldn't breathe. The betrayal wasn't just a simple affair. It was a deliberate, calculated lie. The man named Alex, the one Sarah had been seeing, was a stranger to me. Yet, his presence in her life felt like a knife twisting in my heart. Every memory I had of Sarah now felt tainted. How long had this been going on? How many times had she smiled at me, held my hand, and made promises, all the while deceiving me? The man's voice cut through my thoughts. "I know this is hard, Daniel, but you need to hear the whole story. There's more to it than just the affair. Sarah was involved in something bigger, something that goes far beyond you and her." I glanced up at him, my mind reeling. "What do you mean? What could be bigger than what she did to me?" The man leaned forward, his eyes intense. "It's not just about betrayal. It's about manipulation. Sarah wasn't just playing with your heart. She was playing with the truth. The person you need to be worried about isn't just her. It's Alex. He's dangerous, Daniel. And she got herself tangled in something far darker than you can imagine." I blinked, trying to process the words. "What are you talking about? Who is Alex? Why would he want to hurt me?" The man sighed, running a hand through his hair as if gathering his thoughts. "Alex isn't just some guy she met and fell in love with. He's part of a much bigger picture. He's been involved in some shady dealings for years. And Sarah, she got sucked into it. She got pulled into his world without realizing the consequences." I stared at him, a sense of disbelief settling in. "You're telling me she wasn't just cheating on me, she was involved in criminal activity this whole time?" He nodded solemnly. "That's exactly what I'm saying." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. How could she? How could she get involved with someone like that? She was a part of my life, my world. She knew everything about me. How could she go behind my back and get involved in something so dangerous? The man paused, watching me carefully. "It's not always clear when you're in it, Daniel. You get caught up in someone else's world, and before you know it, you're in too deep. Sarah thought she could handle it. She thought she could control the situation. But Alex had other plans. He used her, just like he's used everyone else." Cold chill ran down my spine. "But why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she come clean about it?" The man's eyes softened for a moment, and then he spoke in a quiet, almost pitying tone. "She was scared, Daniel. She was in over her head, and by the time she realized the mess she was in, it was too late. She couldn't get out, and she didn't want to drag you into it. So she kept it a secret. I felt a pang of anger mixed with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was sympathy, or maybe it was the remnants of the love I had once felt for Sarah. But as the man's words sank in, I realized the truth. I had been lied to on a level that went beyond personal betrayal. Sarah had kept me in the dark to protect me from a world I never even knew existed. But in doing so, she had betrayed me in ways I never could have imagined. I looked at the man again, my mind still whirling with confusion. "Why are you telling me all this? What do you want from me?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because you deserve to know the truth. I know you've been hurt and I'm sorry for that. But you're going to have to face it. And when you do, you'll understand that Sarah's actions, as bad as they were, weren't just about you. They were about her being manipulated by a dangerous person." His words hung in the air, each one heavier than the last. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything I thought I knew about Sarah, about our life together, had been shattered in an instant. The person I had loved, the woman I had built my future with, was now a stranger to me. And yet, there was still a part of me that wanted to understand. Why had she done it? Had she truly been manipulated, or had she simply made a choice to live in that world? The man's voice broke through my thoughts again. "You need to be careful, Daniel. If you're going to confront her, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Alex is dangerous, and Sarah, she's caught in his web." The reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. My marriage had been a lie, but this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about something much darker, something that had the potential to destroy everything I had left. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing with questions, fears, and a deep sense of helplessness. What was I supposed to do now? Could I confront Sarah? Should I? Or was I stepping into a world that I wasn't prepared to face? The man's eyes locked onto mine. "You're not alone in this. I'm here to help, but you need to be ready. The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a much larger struggle." The world felt like it was crashing down around me. Each new piece of information I uncovered seemed to pull me deeper into a web I didn't know how to escape. Sarah wasn't just a woman who cheated on me. She was tangled in something much darker, and it was all too much to process at once. As the man's words echoed in my mind, I realized I was standing at a crossroads, facing a choice that could alter the course of my life forever. The room seemed smaller now, the walls pressing in as I tried to make sense of everything. How could Sarah, the woman I thought I knew, have been involved in something so sinister? How could she have lied to me for so long, not just about her affair, but about the dangers surrounding her? I couldn't wrap my head around it. But the hardest part was yet to come, the confrontation. The man had told me that if I was going to face Sarah, I had to be prepared for the truth, no matter how hard it was. But was I ready? Could I truly handle the weight of everything I was about to uncover? I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing. The question lingered like a shadow. What do I do now? I could feel the anger rising within me, but it wasn't just anger at Sarah. It was anger at myself too. How had I been so blind? How had I failed to see the signs of something so much bigger than a simple affair? It wasn't just her betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that I had been living in a lie, believing that everything between us was perfect. But now it was all coming apart. And as painful as it was, I knew I had to face her. I had to know the full extent of her involvement, even if it meant facing truths that I wasn't sure I could handle. I had to know why she did this. And, if I was honest with myself, a part of me was still holding on to the hope that there was an explanation, a reason behind it all. The man watched me quietly as I wrestled with my thoughts. His presence was almost comforting in a way, as if he understood the weight of what I was going through. "You're going to have to make a decision, Daniel," he said softly. "Do you confront Sarah? Do you find out the truth, no matter what it costs you? Or do you walk away and let her keep the secrets she's buried?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. Could I really confront her? Could I face the woman I thought I knew and demand answers for the betrayal and lies? What if the truth was more than I could handle? What if it shattered everything I had left of my self-respect, my dignity? But then again, what choice did I have? If I didn't confront her, I would be living in the shadow of doubt, forever wondering what could have been. The truth, as painful as it might be, was the only way forward. I need to talk to her, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of resolve and fear. I need to hear it from her. I need to know why. I need to understand. The man nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. That's the first step, Daniel. But remember, this won't be easy. People don't just walk away from the kind of things Sarah has been involved in. And if you dig too deep, you might find yourself in more danger than you're prepared for. I didn't care. In that moment, I didn't care about the danger, about the fear, or about what I might uncover. I just knew that I couldn't go on living in the dark. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. Where is she? I asked, my voice firm now, the uncertainty beginning to fade. The man hesitated, as if weighing his words. She's at home. But it's not going to be easy, Daniel. She's been hiding for a reason. She knows you're coming for answers, and she'll do anything to keep you from the truth. I clenched my fists. Let her try. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stood in front of Sarah's house. The air felt thick, suffocating like the calm before a storm. I had no idea what I was about to walk into, but I knew that there was no turning back. This was the moment of reckoning, the one I had been avoiding for so long. I had to face Sarah, not just as my wife, but as the woman who had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. The woman who had been hiding her dark secrets, and whose lies had woven a tangled web that threatened to unravel everything we had built together. I rang the doorbell, my hand trembling slightly. It felt like the world had gone silent around me, as if everything had come to a standstill in this moment. But then the door creaked open, and there she stood. Sarah, my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. Her eyes widened as she saw me standing there, a mix of surprise and something else flickering across her face. Guilt, fear, maybe both. Daniel, she whispered, her voice shaky, almost as if she hadn't expected me to show up. What are you doing here? I could hear the tremor in her voice, the hesitation that gave away everything. She knew. She knew this confrontation was inevitable. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice cold, hard with a bitterness that surprised even me. About everything. About you. About him. Her face paled as the realization hit her. She stepped back instinctively, as though trying to distance herself from the truth that was about to come crashing down. But I wasn't going to let her escape this time. Daniel, please, she started, but I cut her off. Whoa. I need to hear it from you. I need you to explain why you did it. Why you betrayed me, Sarah. I need to know why you kept this secret from me for so long. I deserve that much, don't I? I took a step closer, my words laced with anger and pain. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and I could see the conflict within her. She was fighting, struggling to find a way out of the corner I had forced her into. But there was no escape now. No more lies, no more excuses. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, she stammered, but her voice broke halfway through. It just happened. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. You have to believe me. Her words were empty. I could hear the pleading in her voice, but it didn't reach me. How could I believe her now? After everything that had happened. After everything she had hidden from me. Her betrayal was so much deeper than a mere affair. It was a web of lies, of manipulation, and I could feel it choking the life out of what we had once shared. Don't lie to me, Sarah. I yelled, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. You didn't just accidentally fall into an affair. You didn't just accidentally keep it a secret for months. You chose this. You chose him over me, over everything we had. And now you're trying to make me believe that it was all some kind of accident. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she shook her head. No, Daniel, I swear to you it wasn't like that. I didn't mean to hurt you. Then what? I cut her off again, my voice rising with every word. What was it like, Sarah? Tell me the truth. Tell me how you got caught up in this mess. Tell me how long this has been going on. Was it just him, or were there others too? She didn't answer right away. For a long moment, she just stood there, her eyes avoiding mine, as though searching for the right words to explain the unexplainable. But then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. It started a few months ago, when you were always working late and I was feeling so lonely. I never thought I would find someone else, but he made me feel wanted again. He made me feel like I wasn't invisible. The words cut through me like a knife. She was admitting it. She wasn't just apologizing, she was explaining herself, justifying what she had done. She was telling me that I had somehow failed her, that it was my fault she had sought comfort in another man. But I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. You should have come to me, Sarah. I shouted, the frustration and betrayal finally spilling over. You should have told me you were unhappy. You should have told me you felt neglected. But no, you decided to throw everything away for a few stolen moments with him. You chose him over our marriage. You chose him over us. Her head dropped, her tears now flowing freely. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but it didn't change anything. The damage was done. No amount of crying or pleading could fix what she had broken. I'm sorry, Daniel, she whispered, barely audible. I never meant for any of this to happen. I swear I never meant to hurt you. But the words fell flat. They meant nothing now. Nothing could undo what had been done. The lies, the secrets, the affair. It was all too much for me to bear. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice shaking with the weight of the decision I had to make. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. As the truth about Sarah's affair began to unfold, I felt a sense of betrayal that shook me to my very core. In that moment, I wasn't just hurt by Sarah's actions, but I also found myself struggling to comprehend how long this had been going on behind my back. I had trusted her with everything. The years we had spent together, the shared memories, the life we had built. How could all of that be so easily overshadowed by her deceit? It wasn't just about the affair. It was the secrecy, the lies, the countless moments where I had been completely unaware of her betrayal. How did I miss the signs? I wondered. Had I been so blinded by my own trust in her that I had ignored the small, subtle clues that could have led me to the truth? I remember the initial shock vividly. That feeling of your world shattering in a single moment. I could hear the sound of my heart racing, my breaths shallow and erratic. The room seemed to close in on me, my mind struggling to process everything that was happening. The anniversary celebration, which should have been a night of joy, had turned into a nightmare. Sarah, on the other hand, had left the party with him, almost as if nothing had happened. She didn't seem fazed by the confrontation. It was as if she had prepared herself for this moment long ago. My anger, confusion, and hurt were overwhelming, but one emotion rose above all others. Revenge. I needed answers. I needed to know how deep this had gone, who else had been involved, and most importantly, what her intentions were. I couldn't let her think she could get away with this so easily. My mind was already spinning with thoughts of how I would confront her. The more I thought about it, the more the idea of exposing her affair, of making her face the consequences of her actions, became more appealing. In the days that followed, I couldn't get rid of the images of Sarah and Daniel together. The thought of them in each other's arms, laughing and enjoying the same things that had once been ours, filled me with an intense rage. I couldn't help but think that she had planned this all along, perhaps even enjoying the power she held over me. I spent hours in solitude, replaying the conversation at the anniversary party, questioning every word, every gesture, trying to find the truth in the chaos. Why had she never told me? Why had she kept it a secret for so long? These questions gnawed at me, and the more I searched for answers, the more I felt an urge to take matters into my own hands. I knew the next step was clear. I had to confront her, but this time it would be different. This time I wouldn't just sit there, helpless and heartbroken. No, I would take control of the situation, and in the process, I would make sure Sarah realized the full extent of the damage she had caused. I wasn't just seeking closure anymore. I was seeking justice. I wanted her to feel the pain I was feeling, and I wanted her to know that what she had done wasn't something I could simply forgive. It was time for the truth to come to light, and I would be the one to expose it. The moment I knew it was time to confront Sarah, my heart felt like it was pounding against my chest. The air around me felt thick with tension, the weight of the truth hanging heavily over me. I had always prided myself on being a calm, rational person, but in that moment, all that went out the window. I couldn't hold back anymore. The need to know everything, to make her face the consequences of her actions, was overpowering. I couldn't just let this slip by. I couldn't just go on pretending like everything was fine when deep down, I knew the foundation of our relationship had crumbled to dust. Sarah had shattered it with one careless affair, and now it was my turn to break the silence. I waited for the perfect moment. As the days dragged on, I spent hours trying to come up with the best way to approach her, but nothing felt right. There was no way to soften the blow, no way to prepare myself for the devastation I was about to face. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth needed to come out no matter how much it hurt. I decided to do it face to face. I couldn't just send her a message or call her. No, this was too important. I needed to see her reactions, to witness the guilt, the regret, or perhaps the indifference in her eyes. It was time to hold her accountable. When I finally sat down with Sarah, I could see that she knew something was wrong. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, and her lips trembled as she tried to muster the strength to speak. But I didn't give her the chance. I went straight to the point. "Sarah, I know about you and Daniel," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words never came. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. The tension in the room was almost suffocating. She seemed to hesitate, as if trying to decide whether to deny it or to come clean. I could see the internal struggle on her face. But before she could speak, I pressed on. "I know everything. The affair, the lies, the secrets you've been hiding from me. How could you do this, Sarah? How could you betray me like this?" Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sympathy for her. But then I remembered everything. The years of trust she had torn apart in a matter of months. The lies that had been woven so carefully. The deceit that had become so deeply ingrained in our lives. No, I couldn't pity her. Not now. "I'm sorry, Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." But I cut her off. "Don't say you're sorry. Because I know you're not. If you were, you wouldn't have done this in the first place. This wasn't some mistake. This was a choice, and you made it." She flinched at my words, but I wasn't done. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. "How long has this been going on? Was it just the affair, or was there more? What else have you been hiding from me?" I demanded, my voice growing more intense with every word. Sarah looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as if the weight of her own actions had finally hit her. She sighed deeply, as if she knew this moment had been inevitable, and the truth could no longer be buried. "It started months ago. After the first time Daniel and I met," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was just supposed to be a fling, a distraction. But then it became more. I never meant for it to get this far, but it did." I felt a rush of nausea hit me. The idea that she had been seeing him for months, behind my back, made my blood boil. This wasn't some short-lived affair. It was something that had been planned, something that had been built on lies and betrayal. "You think that makes it better?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "That you never meant for it to go this far. Doesn't change what you did, Sarah. You chose him over me. You chose him over everything we had." Tears began to stream down her face as she finally spoke the words I had been waiting to hear. "I never meant to hurt you. I don't know what happened. I got lost." "I don't care about your excuses anymore," I snapped, my anger rising to the surface. "The damage is done. You've ruined everything. Our marriage, our trust. It's all gone because of you." The words felt like a weight off my shoulders, but they also left me hollow. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking control. It was about facing the painful reality of our broken relationship and deciding what came next. And deep down, I knew that the next step was no longer about saving our marriage. It was about finding a way to heal and move on. As I looked at Sarah, sitting there in front of me, broken and defeated, I realized that the person I had loved for so long was no longer the same. The woman who had once been my wife was now a stranger, someone I could never trust again. As Sarah continued to sit in front of me, her face a mask of tears and remorse, I couldn't help but feel a cold emptiness inside. Every word that escaped her lips felt like a distant echo, faint and hollow, as if they didn't belong to the person I once knew. I had never imagined a day would come when I'd be sitting here, facing the truth of her betrayal. The silence between us was deafening. Neither of us spoke for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was only moments. I could feel her gaze on me, waiting, hoping for some sign that I would forgive her. But forgiveness seemed so far out of reach now. How could I ever forgive someone who had destroyed everything we had built together? "Mark, please." She started again, her voice trembling. But I stopped her. I couldn't hear her apologies anymore. It wasn't enough. "Don't say anything more, Sarah," I said, my voice hard, a stark contrast to the soft man I once was. The person I had been was slipping away, replaced by someone hardened by pain, disappointment, and rage. "What you did isn't just a mistake. It wasn't a fleeting moment of weakness. It was a deliberate choice. You chose him. You chose to betray me." I saw her flinch at my words, but there was no remorse in me anymore. There couldn't be. The love I had felt for her was now buried under layers of lies, secrets, and betrayal. Every glance, every touch, every intimate moment we'd shared now seemed like a cruel joke. The woman I thought I knew had been a stranger all along. "How could you, Sarah? After everything we've been through, you could do this to me?" I asked, my voice quiet but cutting through the air like a blade. The pain was still raw, fresh, yet I felt numb, as if I were disconnected from the reality of what was happening. I couldn't fathom how this had become our reality. She tried to reach out to me, but I recoiled, instinctively pulling away. The hurt was still too fresh, and the betrayal was too deep. There was no way I could let her touch me. No way I could allow her to invade my personal space with her presence after everything she had done. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake. But it's over, Mark. I ended things with Daniel. I'm here now. I want to fix this. Please just give me a chance." A hollow laugh escaped my lips at her words. "Fix this," I repeated, my voice laced with bitterness. "You can't fix this, Sarah. You can't undo the damage you've done. You've shattered everything, and no amount of pleading is going to change that." I could see the desperation in her eyes. She was broken and she wanted to make things right, but it was too late. The trust once so solid between us was gone. It had been buried under layers of lies, deceit, and guilt. No amount of apologies or promises could change that. I was done. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I almost felt pity for her. But then I remembered everything. The months of deception, the long nights I spent wondering if something was wrong, if I had done something to make her drift away. And I realized that this wasn't just her mistake. It was mine too. I had been blind to the signs, too trusting, too forgiving. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly, the words coming out softer than I expected. "I can't just pretend everything is fine, Sarah. I can't act like you didn't tear apart everything we had. The love I had for you is gone." Her face crumpled in anguish as she let out a choked sob. "Please, Mark. Love you. Sorry. I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice barely audible through her sobs. But as much as I wanted to believe her, as much as I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her that everything would be okay, I knew I couldn't. The damage was done. The foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and no amount of love could rebuild it now. The pain of watching her break down in front of me was unbearable, but I had to be strong. I had to make a decision that was best for me, even if it meant letting go of someone I once called my wife. "You've already hurt me more than you'll ever understand," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I can't fix this, Sarah. We can't fix this." The finality of my words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. She knew this was it. This was the end. The end of our marriage. The end of everything. And yet, as I stood up to leave, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. This wasn't the life I had imagined for myself. This wasn't the future I had dreamed of. But it was my reality now, and I had to face it. The woman I had once loved was now just a memory, a painful one. And as I walked away from the house, the only thing that remained was the bitter taste of betrayal and the uncertain road ahead. I walked out of the house, leaving Sarah behind, her cries echoing in my ears. But there was no turning back. As I stepped onto the cold, unfamiliar street, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotions crash over me. Betrayal, anger, heartbreak, but beneath it all, a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I was breathing again. The weight of her lies, the burden of pretending everything was okay, had been suffocating me. I was losing myself in the chaos of our broken marriage, and leaving was the only way to find myself again. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about me. I had to protect myself from further destruction. I had to reclaim my peace, my dignity, my self-respect. As I walked aimlessly, I found myself in a park. It was empty, save for a few joggers and dog walkers. I sat on a bench, burying my face in my hands, my mind racing, trying to process everything that had happened. How did we get here? How did the woman I once trusted with my heart, my future, betray me so completely? And more importantly, why did I let it happen? I knew the answer, though I didn't want to admit it. I had ignored the signs. I had been too trusting, too blinded by love. I had been so focused on building a future with Sarah that I had failed to notice the cracks in our relationship. I had ignored the late nights, the distant looks, the unexplained absences. I had ignored my gut, the voice inside me that whispered, something's wrong. But it wasn't just her fault. I had allowed it. I had let her lies slide, convinced myself that everything was fine, even when I knew deep down it wasn't. I had been afraid of facing the truth, afraid of what it would mean for our marriage, for my life. I had been living in denial, unwilling to confront the reality that the woman I loved no longer loved me in return. I stood up, feeling the cool breeze on my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something other than pain. Felt anger. Anger that she had destroyed the life we had built. Anger that she had lied to me for so long. But most of all, I felt anger at myself for allowing it to go on for so long. It was time to take control. It was time to put myself first. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go back to that house, not yet. I needed space. I needed time to think, to clear my head. The world felt heavy, but there was a small glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, I could rebuild my life. As I walked through the streets, I thought about what I wanted for my future. What did I need to do to heal? To move on from this betrayal? There were so many questions, but there was one answer that stood out above the rest. I needed to take control of my own narrative. No longer would I let Sarah's actions define me. I would define myself. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of this betrayal would never fully fade. But for the first time I felt a sense of clarity. I was done being a victim. I was done letting others dictate my happiness. I needed to find strength, not in someone else but within myself. I needed to remember who I was before Sarah came into my life. I needed to rediscover my passions, my ambitions, my sense of self-worth. And most importantly, I needed to forgive myself for allowing her betrayal to take root in the first place. It was a long road ahead, but I knew it would be worth it. I had no idea where this journey would take me, but I was ready to face whatever came my way. I was ready to heal. As I continued to walk through the streets, my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of my phone ringing. I took it out of my pocket, seeing that it was a message from Sarah. "Mark, please, I know you're hurting. I just want to talk. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to respond, to hear her out, to give her a chance to explain herself further. But then, I remembered the tears in my eyes earlier, the brokenness I felt when I walked away from her. I had already heard all I needed to hear. There was no going back. No more second chances. I blocked her number. The notification disappeared from my screen, and with it, any hope I had of reconciliation. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my self-respect. And as I walked away from the life we had built, I finally understood something crucial. I was worth more than the betrayal I had endured. I had to remind myself that I was enough on my own. I had to start living for me again, without the shadows of past mistakes hanging over me. It was time to move forward, even if the road ahead was uncertain. As I stood on the busy street, the hum of the city around me felt distant, like I was in a world of my own, completely detached from everything. The cool evening air bit at my skin, but I didn't feel it. My mind was in a whirlwind, caught in the chaos of everything that had transpired in the past few hours. My thoughts kept circling back to Sarah, the betrayal, the anger, but most of all the pain. The confrontation in the house had left a mark on me, deeper than I cared to admit. I could still hear her pleading voice in my head, asking for forgiveness, promising that she would change, that things would get better. But I knew better. I had heard the same empty promises before. They meant nothing. No amount of words could erase the damage she had done. No amount of apologies could make me forget the trust she had shattered. I was tempted to go back, to give her one last chance, to at least hear her out. But deep down I knew that would be a mistake. There was no going back. I couldn't live in a lie anymore. I had to face the reality that our marriage was over, that it had been over for a long time. It wasn't just the affair that had destroyed us. It was everything. The lack of communication, the constant misunderstandings, the emotional distance. It all came flooding back to me in waves as I walked through the streets, my steps slow and deliberate. I thought about the good times we had, the love that once existed between us. How could something so beautiful turn into this mess of lies and broken promises? How could the woman I had given my heart to, the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, betray me in such a profound way? I paused at a street corner, waiting for the light to change. The world moved around me, people rushing by, oblivious to the internal storm I was weathering. I wanted to scream, to let out all the frustration and pain, but I kept it inside. I couldn't let it consume me. The light turned green, and I crossed the street, my mind still lost in thought. I hadn't realized where my feet were taking me until I found myself standing outside my best friend, Jake's apartment building. Hey, my rock. The person I had leaned on through all the ups and downs of life. He had been there for me when my father passed away, when I lost my job, and even when Sarah and I first got together. He was my closest confidant, the one person I could always count on. And yet, Jake was part of the reason I was here, standing alone in the cold, trying to make sense of everything. I had never suspected that he was capable of betraying me. Not in a million years. But now it felt like everything had been a lie. I felt a strange mix of emotions, betrayal, confusion, and even anger. How could he, my best friend, be involved in this? How could he sleep with Sarah, knowing what she meant to me? Was our friendship just a facade to him? I rang the doorbell, my hands shaking slightly. When the door opened, Jake stood there, his expression softening when he saw me. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes bloodshot and tired. "Mark," he said softly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Hey, I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, staring at him, trying to process the flood of emotions that coursed through me." He seemed sincere, but the damage had already been done. "How could you?" I finally managed to say, my voice rough. "How could you do this to me, Jake? You're my best friend." He looked down, clearly ashamed. "I know, man. Messed up. I don't know what I was thinking. I've been torn up about it. It was a huge mistake. A mistake," I repeated bitterly. "This wasn't a mistake, Jake. This was betrayal. You didn't just cross a line. You destroyed everything. My trust in you, in her. Everything." Jake looked up, his face contorted with regret. "I never meant to hurt you, Mark. Swear. But it happened, And now we have to face it. We, I said, my voice rising. There is no we in this, Jake. You don't get to be part of this anymore. You've crossed a line I can never unsee. I turned and walked away from him, my heart heavy with the realization that not only had my marriage crumbled, but my closest friendship had too. As I walked down the stairs, I heard Jake calling after me, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to say. The truth had been revealed, and it was too much for me to handle in one sitting. I needed space. I needed time to think about everything. As I stepped back into the street, I realized something. Sarah was one thing. Her betrayal was painful, yes, but it was also something I could eventually move past. But Jake, that was different. The person I had trusted most in the world had just shattered that trust. And that was something I wasn't sure I could ever fix. For a long time I just walked, not really knowing where I was going. But one thing was clear in my mind. The road ahead was going to be long and painful. There was no quick fix for the damage that had been done. But I also knew that I couldn't stay stuck in this pain forever. It was time to let go. The next few days felt like an endless blur of pain and confusion. Each morning, I woke up with the same heavy feeling in my chest, as if a weight was pressing on my heart, suffocating me. I would stare at the ceiling, trying to remember what it felt like before all of this happened, before I had discovered the truth about Sarah and Jake. But it felt like a lifetime ago. The man I had been before the betrayal, seemed like a stranger now. I couldn't escape the thoughts. They followed me everywhere, relentlessly gnawing at my mind. It wasn't just the affair that haunted me. It was the entire collapse of my world. The idea of having built a life with someone who was willing to destroy it so easily was something I couldn't comprehend. Sarah was the woman I trusted the most, the one I thought I would grow old with, the one I imagined sharing all my dreams and fears with. How could she betray me in such a fundamental way? But what hurt the most, what truly destroyed me, was Jake. He wasn't just my best friend. He was my brother, my confidant, the person I trusted more than anyone else. The man I thought would always have my back no matter what. And yet, he had willingly destroyed everything. Our friendship, my marriage, and perhaps even my faith in people. As I sat alone in my apartment, the silence around me felt deafening. I had nowhere to turn, no one to talk to. Even my own thoughts seemed like enemies, always working against me, reminding me of what I had lost. I was pacing the floor, lost in the turmoil of my emotions, when my phone buzzed. I picked it up, hoping it was a message from someone who could give me a sense of clarity. It was Sarah. "Mark, please, we need to talk. I need to explain everything. I never meant for it to happen like this. Please just let me explain." The words on the screen felt like a slap in the face. How could she still think she had the right to explain herself? What explanation could possibly make sense of what she had done? I was tempted to ignore it, to block her from my life entirely. But something held me back. For a brief moment, I thought about how this might have all unfolded differently. What if I had been more attentive? What if I had seen the warning signs? What if Jake hadn't been a part of this? But no matter how many what-ifs I ran through my mind, it didn't change the fact that they had both betrayed me in the worst way possible. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I could feel the anger building up inside me again, that rage that I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel before. How could they do this to me? And yet, a part of me wanted to hear her out. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because I had spent so many years with her, shared so many memories. Or maybe it was because I was too afraid to face the reality that it was all over. Finally, I let out a deep breath and typed out a reply. "Fine. We can talk. But only if you're being honest with me. No more lies, no more excuses." It took a moment for her to respond, and when she did, it was almost immediate. "Promise, Mark. No lies. Swear. Just please meet me." The meeting was set for later that afternoon. I could barely concentrate on anything else as the hours passed, my mind racing with what I would say, what I would ask her. Part of me didn't even want to meet her. What was there left to say? But I had agreed, and so I had to face the reality. As the time neared, I found myself pacing in my living room, feeling the tension build up in my shoulders. I could already feel the pressure of the conversation that was about to unfold, the anger that would spill out, and the painful truth that would be revealed. When I arrived at the coffee shop where we had agreed to meet, Sarah was already sitting at a table by the window. She looked different. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen as though she hadn't slept in days. There was an air of guilt about her, but it wasn't enough. I was still angry, still heartbroken. I walked over to her table and she looked up at me, her expression one of apprehension. She tried to smile, but it was a weak attempt, a sad shadow of the woman I once knew. "Mark," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond at first. I just sat down across from her and stared, not sure what I was supposed to feel in this moment. What was I supposed to say? What was she going to say? Finally, she broke the silence. "I owe you an apology, a huge one. But I also owe you the truth, Mark." I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. "The truth? After everything that's happened, you think the truth is going to fix this?" "I know I've hurt you more than anyone ever could," she said, her voice breaking. "But I need you to hear me out, okay? Please." I nodded, though I didn't feel like I was prepared for what she was about to say. She took a deep breath, her eyes welling up with tears. "It wasn't just about the affair. It was about me feeling like I wasn't enough. Like I couldn't meet your expectations. When things between us started falling apart, I found myself lost. I didn't know who I was anymore, and then Jake came along and for a moment I felt seen. I know that's no excuse, but it's the truth. I made a terrible choice." Her words cut through me, but I couldn't let myself show her that I was affected. I had to stay strong, to hold on to the anger I felt. "You don't get to justify what you did, Sarah," I said, my voice low but firm. "You betrayed me. And you did it with my best friend. There's no coming back from that." She wiped her tears away, her face crumpling in sorrow. "I know," she whispered. "No. I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it all back, Mark. But I can't. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it, even if you never forgive me." There was again the same broken promises, the same empty apologies. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "It's too late for that, Sarah," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I don't think I can ever forgive you." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, not looking back. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, but it all felt empty, hollow. Sarah's words echoed in my mind, but they didn't bring the clarity I had hoped for. There was no redemption in her apology, no sense of closure. If anything, it just deepened the wound. I tried to avoid thinking about it, but the reality kept crashing back in. Every time I walked into the house we had once shared, the memories hit me like a tidal wave. The photographs of our trips, the gifts we'd exchanged, the quiet evenings spent together. Everything now felt like a cruel reminder of the life I had lost. And then there was Jake. My best friend, my confidant, who had once been like a brother to me. Now, every time I thought of him, I felt a mix of rage and betrayal. How could he have done this to me? How could he have turned his back on everything we had shared, everything I thought we stood for? My thoughts spiraled as the days went by, and I knew that I couldn't keep running from it forever. I had to confront Jake. I needed answers, closure, and perhaps some sort of justice. The question was, how would I handle it? What would I say to him when I saw him again? Would he apologize? Would he try to justify his actions like Sarah had? I couldn't wait anymore. Had to do it. That evening I called Jake, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Mark," he said, his voice cautious. "I was wondering when you'd call." The arrogance in his tone only fueled the anger that had been simmering inside me. He didn't even sound remorseful. There was no hesitation, no apology. Just the cold, indifferent voice of a man who had betrayed his best friend. "I need to see you," I said, my voice steady, though inside I was seething. "Now." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What's this about?" "Just get to the damn bar," I snapped, before hanging up without another word. Jake was already at the bar when I arrived. He sat in a corner booth, his posture relaxed, as if nothing had happened. He wasn't looking at me when I walked in, but the second he heard my footsteps, he turned his head, his eyes meeting mine with an unsettling calmness. It was almost as if he'd been expecting this moment. Maybe he had. I didn't waste time. I walked straight up to the booth and slid into the seat opposite him. "Jake," I said, my voice low but full of anger, "do you have any idea what you've done?" He didn't flinch. He just took a slow sip from his drink, his eyes not leaving mine. "I know," he said after a long pause. "I know what I did." His admission only fueled the fire inside me. "You betrayed me," I spat. "You destroyed everything. My marriage, our friendship. Everything. And you're sitting there like it's nothing." "I'm not sitting here like it's nothing, Mark," he said, finally putting his drink down and meeting my gaze. "I'm sitting here because I'm trying to understand why you think you have any right to be angry at me." I blinked, taken aback by his response. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You're angry at me," he continued, his tone even. "But let's be real here, Mark. You haven't been the perfect husband either. Sure. Sarah's been unhappy for a long time. And I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because she needed someone, and he paused, his face softening as if trying to find the right words. "I thought I was doing what she needed. And you, well, you weren't there for her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My best friend was justifying his actions by pointing out the flaws in my marriage. Was he seriously trying to make me feel guilty for his betrayal? "Are you out of your damn mind?" I hissed. "You think that justifies what you did? You think you can just waltz in and ruin everything because Sarah was unhappy? That's not an excuse, Jake. That's cowardice." He sat back in his seat, looking unfazed. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Mark. I'm not even sorry for what I did. I did what I had to do." "Had to do?" I repeated incredulously. "You don't get to make decisions for me, for my life, or for Sarah's. You crossed a line. You crossed a line I'll never be able to forget. And you know what? I don't want your apology. I want you to get out of my life. For good." I stood up, the anger inside me boiling over, and walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Jake's voice calling out, but I didn't turn around. The man I thought was my brother, the man who had shared so much of my life, was no longer someone I recognized. And I realized as I walked away that I had just lost more than a friend. I had lost a piece of myself. The night after my confrontation with Jake was a blur. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, overanalyzing every word we'd exchanged, every moment in the conversation. I had told him to leave my life, and yet, a small part of me wanted to believe it was a mistake. But no, the clarity of my anger told me that it was the right decision. Jake was no longer the person I thought he was. I had to move forward, even if it meant cutting ties with someone who had once been a brother to me. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything settling on my chest. My marriage, my trust, my life. All of it had been shattered in a matter of weeks. I had lived through betrayal in the worst form possible, not just from Sarah, but from Jake as well. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My entire world had been built on lies, and now there was nothing left. I had a million questions swirling in my mind, none of which had clear answers. Why had Sarah kept the affair from me for so long? Why had Jake let it go on? And most importantly, why had I been so blind? The answers seemed evasive, slipping away every time I tried to grasp them. I couldn't make sense of any of it. By morning I was exhausted, but I knew I had to face the reality. I couldn't hide forever. I needed closure. But closure didn't come easily. Came in the form of a message from Sarah. The notification popped up on my phone, and for a moment I hesitated. I had been avoiding her calls and messages for days. Part of me didn't even want to read the message. But another part of me, the part that still held on to the hope of some kind of resolution, couldn't ignore it. I opened the message. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt us. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Her words felt empty. Apologies without substance. How could she have the nerve to ask for a conversation after everything that had happened? After what I had learned? But, as much as I resented her, a part of me was still clinging to the hope that we could fix things. Maybe it was the illusion of love, or maybe it was just the fact that I didn't want to be alone. Either way, I knew that I had to face her, no matter how painful it would be. I didn't respond to her message right away. Instead, I grabbed my keys and went for a long drive, hoping that the movement of the car would help clear my head. But it didn't. My thoughts remained clouded, as heavy and suffocating as the sky above me. I had to go home eventually, though, and face what was waiting there. I pulled into the driveway, my hands gripping the wheel. Sarah's car was in the garage. She was home. I felt a surge of anger. But underneath it there was something else. Fear. Fear of what I might do, of what I might say. I walked into the house, my footsteps sounding hollow against the wooden floors. The air in the house felt different. Colder, heavier. It was as if the house itself knew that the life we had built here was over. Sarah was sitting on the couch when I entered. Her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She had been waiting for me. "Mark," she said softly, her voice trembling. "No, Sarah," I cut her off. "I don't want to hear it. Not right now." I could see the hurt in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The betrayal ran too deep. The trust was broken beyond repair. No apology could undo what had happened. She reached out, her hand trembling, and for a brief moment, I considered letting her explain. But then I remembered everything. The lies. The deception. How could I trust her again? How could I possibly believe anything she said? "I know you're angry," she whispered. "I don't blame you. But I never meant to hurt you. Just happened. And I hate myself for it." I stood there, looking at her, the woman I had once loved, the woman I had married. There was a time when I thought we were untouchable, that nothing could break us. But now I saw her for what she was. Stranger. Someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. "I'm done," I said, my voice quiet but firm. This is over." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't feel anything anymore. I turned and walked out of the living room, not looking back. As I stepped out the door and into the night, I felt a strange sense of finality. I had made my decision. There was no going back now. The next few days were a blur. My emotions were all over the place, fluctuating between anger, sadness, and relief. I kept telling myself that leaving Sarah was the right thing to do. After everything that had happened, how could I not? But there were moments when I felt like I was losing a part of myself. The man I had been before this whole betrayal. He was gone, replaced by someone who was still struggling to understand who he was in this new reality. I had always thought I knew what happiness was, but now the lines between love, anger, and disappointment were so blurred that I could hardly make sense of them anymore. I tried to keep busy, focusing on work and anything else that could take my mind off of the mess my life had become. But at night, when the house was quiet, the silence would close in on me, and I'd find myself staring at the empty space beside me on the bed, remembering what it had felt like to have her there. I could almost hear Sarah's voice calling my name, the echo of her presence still lingering in the air. But the truth was undeniable. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had shattered everything we had built together. I couldn't bring myself to forgive her, not yet. Maybe not ever. There was another thought that gnawed at me, something that I couldn't shake off. Jake. How could he have done this to me? How could he betray me like that? He was my best friend, the person I had trusted the most. And yet, he had been the one to destroy everything. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. It hurt in a way I didn't know how to explain. But now I knew that I had to make a choice. I could keep living in this cycle of pain, wondering what went wrong, or I could move forward, even if it meant leaving behind everything I had known. The hardest part was realizing that this was not just about Sarah or Jake anymore. This was about me. I had to find myself again. I called my lawyer the next morning. I wasn't sure what the next step was, but I knew that the longer I delayed, the more I'd be stuck in this limbo. Sarah had already made her choice. Now it was my turn. After the call, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a step toward something more definite. Something that would put an end to the chaos. That evening I packed a bag and left the house. It was strange, almost surreal, walking out the door for the last time. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't stay there anymore. I needed space. I needed time to think, to clear my head. As I drove, I found myself driving toward the beach, a place I had always gone to think. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore always had a way of quieting my racing thoughts, of helping me find some clarity in the chaos. It had been a long time since I had come here, since before everything had gone wrong. I parked the car and walked toward the water, the cool sand beneath my feet, the wind in my hair. The waves crashed relentlessly against the shore, and I watched them for a long time, letting the rhythm of the ocean settle my mind. I needed to stop thinking about Sarah, about Jake, about everything that had happened. I needed to let it go. It was at that moment that I realized I had been living in the past for far too long. The past with Sarah, the past with Jake. It was all over. I couldn't change what had happened, no matter how much I wished I could. But what I could do was start fresh. I could rebuild. And so, standing there on the beach, with the sound of the waves crashing around me, I made a decision. I would let go of the anger. I would stop questioning everything. I would stop trying to make sense of the senseless. It was time for me to start living again. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Anger, sadness, and most of all, confusion. But there was something else growing inside of me. Something that had been buried deep down but was now rising to the surface. A sense of power. I had survived the worst betrayal I could imagine. And yet here I was, standing on my own 2 feet. I was stronger than I had ever realized. I kept asking myself why it had to be this way. Why couldn't Sarah and I have been the couple we once were? Why had Jake betrayed me? What had driven them both to destroy something so pure and beautiful? These questions haunted me, but now I understood something crucial. Answers wouldn't change anything. The truth had been laid bare before me. And no matter how much I wished I could go back in time and make different choices, I couldn't. The only thing I could do now was move forward. As I sat on the beach that day, my mind was made up. The ocean had a way of making things clear, of reminding me that life, like the tides, is always in motion. Things change. People change. Sometimes we don't get the answers we think we deserve. But we keep going because that's what life demands of us. I thought about what it would take to heal, to move on from everything that had happened. The hurt and betrayal would always be a part of me, but I knew that I couldn't let them control me. I couldn't let Sarah or Jake have that power over me anymore. I couldn't keep punishing myself for their actions. It was time to forgive myself and, eventually, forgive them. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I deserved to move on with my life and find my own happiness. When I returned to the apartment that evening, I finally faced the hard decision. I took a deep breath as I dialed Sarah's number, my heart pounding in my chest. It was time to have the conversation I had been avoiding. "Hello." Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Sarah," I said, trying to steady my voice, "we need to talk. I've made up my mind. I'm moving on. What we had is over. It's time for both of us to let go." I could hear the silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if she was crying. But I didn't wait for her response. "I'm not doing this for you, Sarah. I'm doing it for me. I can't keep living in the past. You've made your choices and I've made mine. It's time to go our separate ways." The words felt final as they left my mouth. The weight that had been hanging over me for so long began to lift, replaced with a sense of clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, but I could tell from the tone of her voice that it wasn't the apology I needed. It wasn't enough to erase the damage she had done. She had destroyed the trust we once had, and that was something that couldn't be repaired with words. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, though the ache in my chest told a different story. I just can't keep living like this. I need to find myself again. And I hope in time you can do the same." With that, I hung up the phone. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting. Felt anticlimactic. But that was exactly what I needed. No more drama, no more pain. Just closure. I sat down on the couch and let out a deep breath, realizing that, in some ways, this was the hardest part. Letting go. Moving on. But I knew that it was the right decision. It was time for me to live my life, free from the chains of the past. It was time to rebuild, not just for my own sake, but because I deserved a future filled with hope, not regret. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel like myself again. The pieces of my life slowly started to fall back into place. It wasn't easy. I still thought about Sarah sometimes, and I couldn't forget what Jake had done. But I wasn't going to let those thoughts consume me anymore. I was stronger than that. And in time I would heal. I would move forward. For now, though, I was content with the small victories, the quiet moments of peace I was beginning to feel. I was on the road to healing, and though the journey was far from over, I had taken the first step. That was enough. The weeks that followed were filled with silence, but it wasn't the comforting silence I had hoped for. Instead, it was a quiet desperation. I was learning how to live alone again, navigating the world without Sarah by my side, without Jake's promises of love and loyalty. At times, the loneliness felt suffocating, but it was the kind of loneliness that forced me to grow stronger, to realize how much I had relied on others for my own happiness. It wasn't until one evening, while I was walking through the park near my apartment, that everything changed. I had just finished a long day at work and needed to clear my head. The park was quiet, the kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts as they echoed in the empty space. I was lost in my mind, thinking about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the steps I had taken toward healing, when I saw him. It was Jake. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the lies and the hurt, he was standing there, not far from where I had stopped to rest. His presence seemed to shock the air around me, and for a split second, I thought about turning around and running in the opposite direction. But something inside me, the same part of me that had been broken and rebuilt, forced me to stay. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. Jake hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching mine for something. An answer, an invitation, anything that might make this encounter feel less absurd. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. "I've been thinking about everything. About you. About us." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. How could he stand there after everything he had done, and act like this was just some kind of misunderstanding? How could he still have the nerve to stand before me with such a look of regret? "You've been thinking about us," I repeated, my voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You destroyed everything we had, Jake. You and Sarah. You destroyed me." Jake flinched at my words, but he didn't look away. For a moment, I thought he might break down and apologize, as though it would fix everything. But that's not what happened. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, almost suffocating. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice tinged with guilt. "I don't even deserve your trust. But I need you to know. Sorry. I regret everything." His words hung in the air between us, thick and heavy, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. What was I supposed to say? "It's okay. I forgive you." I had already given him everything, and he had thrown it all away. "I don't want your apologies, Jake," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. "I've moved on, and I need you to understand that I can never go back to what we were. I can't forgive you, not yet. Maybe not ever." He stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind, but I didn't. The finality in my words hung between us, and I watched his expression shift. He looked defeated. But at the same time I could see the glimmer of hope in his eyes. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us. But I knew better. "You can't just show up, Jake," I said, my voice firm, "and expect everything to be okay. You broke my heart. You betrayed me. And that's something I can't just forget." His shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, I saw a flash of the man I once loved, the man who had promised me forever. But that man was gone. This was a stranger, someone who had torn apart everything we had built. There was no going back. "I'm sorry," he said again, his words laced with sorrow. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't think it would hurt you." "Of course it hurt me, Jake," I snapped, the anger rising once more. "You and Sarah lied to me. You both betrayed me in the worst way possible. And now you want to waltz back into my life like nothing happened." I could see the pain in his eyes, but it no longer mattered. The man I had loved had left me long ago, and all that remained was a shadow of the past, a past that I was no longer willing to carry. Turning away from him, I took a step toward the park exit. Felt like the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was the right choice. I had already walked away once, and I was doing it again. But before I could leave, I heard his voice, softer now, almost pleading. "I understand if you can't forgive me. But please let me prove that I can change. Let me make things right." I paused for a moment, my heart heavy. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that people could change, that love could heal all wounds. But the other part of me, the part that had been betrayed, knew better. I couldn't let him back into my life. Not now. Not ever. "No, Jake," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I don't need you to prove anything. What I need is to heal. And that means I need you to leave me alone." With those final words, I walked away, leaving Jake standing in the park. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most empowering. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let him, or anyone else, take that away from me. As I walked away, the weight of the past slowly lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't going to let Jake and Sarah's betrayal define me any longer. I was stronger than that. And from this moment forward, I was going to live for myself. The days that followed my encounter with Jake were a blur, each one bleeding into the next. I couldn't escape the nagging thoughts that kept circling in my mind, even though I tried to push them away. The image of him standing there, asking for forgiveness, had haunted me in the quiet moments when I was alone. But I had made the decision to move on, to reclaim my life, and nothing could sway me from that path. At least, that's what I told myself. The problem wasn't Jake. It was me. For weeks, I had lived in the shadow of betrayal, unsure of who I was without him and Sarah in my life. They had both been my pillars, my source of comfort and security. And now that they were gone, I was left standing on shaky ground, struggling to rebuild. The hurt was still there, raw and relentless, but I refused to let it control me. I had to find a way to heal, to become whole again without depending on anyone else. But healing wasn't as easy as I had hoped. Some days I felt strong and empowered, like I could conquer the world. On those days, I would go for long walks, rediscovering the parts of the city I had once loved but had neglected. I would spend time with friends, people who reminded me that I was worthy of love and respect, even after everything I had been through. But on other days, it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me, suffocating me with reminders of the past. One evening, as I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, I saw a message from Sarah. My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of emotions flooded through me. Anger, sadness, and confusion. Why was she reaching out now, after everything? What could she possibly want? Taking a deep breath, I opened the message, my fingers trembling slightly. The text was short, just a few lines, but it felt like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. Please talk to me." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling the bitterness rise in my throat. She had the audacity to ask me to talk to her after everything, after she had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I should have ignored the message, should have deleted it without a second thought. But something inside me, the same part of me that was still healing, couldn't bring myself to do it. I responded, though I knew it would only stir up more pain. You don't get to apologize after what you did, Sarah. You and Jake both betrayed me. And I can't just forget that. I stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send, the words feeling like a weight lifted from my chest. But as soon as the message was sent, I regretted it. There was no going back now. Sarah's betrayal was still fresh in my mind, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to forgive her. But at least I had said what I needed to say. I had reclaimed my voice. The next few days were filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, I felt proud of myself for standing up for what I deserved. I wasn't going to let anyone walk over me again. But on the other hand, there was a lingering sadness, a sadness that I wasn't sure would ever go away. I knew I couldn't keep holding on to the anger, though. Had to let go. For my own sake. I started focusing more on myself, finding new hobbies and passions that I had neglected over the years. I reconnected with old friends, people who had always been there for me, even when I had pushed them away. They reminded me of who I was before all the chaos, before the lies and the heartbreak. But despite everything, despite the progress I was making, there was always a small voice in the back of my mind, whispering that maybe, just maybe, I had made a mistake. What if I was being too harsh? What if I should forgive Jake and Sarah? What if this was all just a misunderstanding? I tried to silence the voice, but it wouldn't go away. I realized, though, that the answer wasn't about forgiveness. It was about moving forward, about putting myself first for the first time in my life. If Jake and Sarah couldn't accept that, then it was on them. I couldn't keep living in the past, wondering if there was a chance for redemption. One night, after a particularly difficult day, I sat in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I had changed in so many ways, and yet, in many ways, I was still the same person, vulnerable, emotional, and capable of love. But I had learned the hard way that love couldn't be given freely to anyone. It had to be earned. And at that moment, I realized that I was the one who needed to earn my own love. The pain from the past would always be there, a scar that would never fully heal. But I would wear it proudly, as a reminder of how far I had come, how much I had grown. I wasn't the same person who had trusted blindly. I was stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. And that, in itself, was the greatest gift I could give myself. I didn't need Jake or Sarah to be whole again. I was enough. The days after my emotional breakdown were a blur. I felt as if I was moving through life in a haze, constantly battling the conflicting thoughts in my head. On one hand, I was certain that I was doing the right thing by distancing myself from Jake and Sarah. On the other hand, there was a growing emptiness inside of me that I couldn't ignore. The silence between us felt unbearable. Was it really over? Could I move on and let go of the people who had once been my everything? I couldn't decide, and the uncertainty gnawed at me every day. It was only a matter of time before I would have to face the inevitable. Another confrontation. I had tried to avoid it, tried to keep my distance from both of them. But deep down I knew the time would come when I would have to face them, Jake especially. And so, when I received an unexpected text message one evening, I knew the moment had arrived. It was from Jake. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. My first instinct was to ignore it, to tell him that I wasn't interested in hearing anything he had to say. But then something inside of me stirred, a curiosity, a lingering desire to hear his side of the story. My mind was racing. What could he possibly have to say to me? What was his explanation for the lies, the betrayal, the emotional devastation? I was conflicted, torn between wanting closure and wanting to protect myself from further pain. But after several minutes of contemplation, I made my decision. I would meet him. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop, a neutral place where we could talk without any distractions. As I sat there, waiting for him to arrive, I felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Was I really ready for this? What would he say that could possibly make any of this better? When Jake walked in, his eyes immediately found mine. I could see the guilt in them, the same guilt that had been there the last time I saw him. He looked different now, tired, weighed down by the consequences of his actions. His once confident stride was replaced with uncertainty as he approached me. "Hey," he said quietly, sitting down across from me. There was a brief moment of silence before he spoke again. His voice strained. "I know this might be the last thing you want to hear, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. This was it. This was the conversation that had been building up for weeks, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jake," I said finally, my voice surprisingly calm. "You hurt me in ways I didn't even know were possible." He looked at me, his expression full of regret. "No, I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen." I felt my anger rise, my chest tightening with the weight of his words. "But it did happen, Jake. You did hurt me. You hurt me in a way that I can't just forget." "I know," he repeated softly. "And I hate myself for it. I've spent every day since thinking about what I did. I've been consumed by the guilt, and it's driving me crazy. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just need you to know that I'm truly sorry." I stared at him, my mind racing with emotions. Was this real? Was this the Jake I had once loved, the man I thought I knew? Or was this just another ploy to make me feel sorry for him, to make me doubt my own feelings? Part of me wanted to believe him, to believe that he was truly remorseful, but another part of me knew better. I had been fooled once before, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. "You don't get to apologize for what you did, Jake," I said, my voice firmer this time. "What you did to me, to Sarah, it was unforgivable. You don't get to come back into my life just because you feel guilty." He looked at me, his face etched with pain. "No. And I don't expect you to just forgive me. I just needed to tell you how sorry I am." There was a long silence between us, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I could feel the tension building inside me, but I knew there was nothing more to say. I didn't need his apology. What I needed was to move on, to find closure without depending on him or Sarah for validation. "You've said your piece," I said finally, standing up from the table. "And I've heard you. But I'm done, Jake. I can't keep living in this cycle of pain. It's time for both of us to move on." Jake didn't say anything as I turned and walked out of the coffee shop. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness wash over me. The final confrontation had come, and it was over. But as I stepped into the cool evening air, I realized something. I was free. Free from the lies, free from the pain, and free from the toxic relationship that had consumed me for so long. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally moving forward. After walking away from Jake, I felt the weight of the conversation lift off my shoulders, but at the same time, a storm of emotions raged inside me. I had finally confronted him, said what needed to be said, and closed that chapter of my life. But in the quiet aftermath, I realized how deeply this betrayal had impacted me. I had never truly allowed myself to grieve, to process the hurt, until now. For days, I struggled with the emotions that surfaced: anger, sadness, confusion. But amid all the chaos, there was a sense of clarity. I had been holding on to a version of Jake and our relationship that no longer existed. The man I thought I knew, the man I loved, was not the man who had betrayed me. And as painful as that realization was, it was also liberating. I spent the next few days in isolation, trying to regain a sense of normalcy in my life. I avoided social media, stopped texting people who might ask about Jake or Sarah, and focused entirely on myself. I immersed myself in my work, throwing myself into projects that I had been neglecting, using the distraction as a way to heal. During this time, I found a new sense of independence that I hadn't experienced before. I had always defined myself by my relationships, with Jake, with Sarah, with the people around me. But now I was learning how to define myself on my own terms. It wasn't easy. There were moments of vulnerability when I longed for the comfort of familiar faces and the idea of love that I had once cherished. But I knew deep down that I had to keep moving forward. One afternoon, as I sat at my favorite cafe, sipping my coffee and reflecting on everything that had transpired, I received a message. It was from Sarah. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the notification on my phone. The last time we spoke, we hadn't exactly parted on the best of terms. Would she apologize? Would she try to justify her actions? Or was this message simply another attempt to manipulate the situation? I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then I remembered how far I had come in the past few days. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let Sarah's manipulations drag me back into that toxic cycle. I opened the message. We need to talk. I know things got out of hand, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I stared at the message, my emotions swirling. Part of me felt a pang of sadness for the friendship we once had, but another part of me felt the familiar sting of betrayal. Could I really believe her? Could I trust her again after everything that had happened? I closed the message without replying. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage from a relationship built on lies and deception. I had learned the hard way that some people are simply not meant to be in your life forever. The days passed, and I started to feel more like myself. I began to reconnect with friends who had been there for me during the darkest days, people who had supported me even when I was blind to the truth. They helped me regain my sense of worth and reminded me that I was not defined by the actions of others. As time went on, I felt myself becoming stronger, more resilient. The pain of the betrayal, while never fully gone, began to fade into the background of my life. I realized that I had the power to shape my own future, and that future was not tied to Jake or Sarah. It was mine to create. A few months later, I found myself standing at the edge of a new chapter. I had moved into a new apartment, one that I could call my own, a space that was free from the ghosts of the past. I had started a new project at work, one that brought me excitement and purpose. And most importantly, I had rediscovered my passion for life, something I had lost in the wake of the betrayal. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate, but I had learned to let go. I had learned that sometimes, walking away from people you love is the only way to reclaim your own happiness. And I had learned that forgiveness, while important, doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to let go of the people who hurt you, no matter how much you may have loved them in the past. One evening, as I sat by the window of my new apartment, watching the sunset and sipping my wine, I realized that I was at peace. The turmoil was gone. The pain had faded into something that was no longer a constant weight on my chest. I had been through the worst, and I had survived. In that moment, I knew that my story wasn't defined by the betrayal. It was defined by my strength, my resilience, and my ability to rise above the heartache. And as I looked out over the city, I knew that the future held endless possibilities. Possibilities that I would face on my own terms, free from the shadows of my past. Time had passed, and I had grown stronger, but there were still lingering moments where I felt the need for closure. I had moved on from the initial shock, healed the raw wounds of betrayal, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I still needed to face Jake one last time. Not for him, but for me. To truly close the door on that chapter and walk away without looking back. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I got the message. My phone buzzed with a notification, and as I glanced at it, my stomach dropped. It was from Jake. I hadn't heard from him in months, and to be honest, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what he had to say. But there was a part of me, the part that sought closure, that knew I couldn't avoid this forever. Can we meet? I need to talk. I stared at the message, debating with myself. The rational part of me wanted to delete the message and move on, but the other part of me, the part that still harbored some remnants of the love I once had for him, wondered what he wanted. Could he possibly be sorry? Could he really understand the pain he had caused? Or was this just another way to manipulate me? I took a deep breath and responded. Fine. We can meet, but it will be on my terms. Jake agreed to meet at a cafe in the city, a neutral place where we wouldn't have to face the memories of the past. When I arrived, I saw him sitting at a corner table, his back slightly hunched, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His hair was messier than I remembered. His face a little thinner, but there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability that I hadn't seen in him before. I sat down across from him, and for a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with all the words we hadn't said over the months. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice shaky. "I know it doesn't mean much after everything that happened, but I am sorry. I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways that I can never take back. I've regretted it every day since." I looked at him, searching his eyes for sincerity. Was he truly sorry? Or was this just another attempt to ease his guilt? I had been through so much already that I wasn't sure if I could believe anything he said. "I'm not here to hear apologies," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I'm here to finally get closure. To understand why. To know if you ever really cared about me. Because what you did to me, it was cruel. It was heartless." Jake looked down, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of his actions in his eyes. The guilt, the shame, the regret, it was all there. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the pain he had caused, to make me forget the months of deception, of pretending that everything was fine when, in reality, it was falling apart. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "I just need you to know that I was wrong. I don't know how to fix it. But I wish I could. I truly do." I sat back in my chair, letting his words hang in the air. It was the apology I had wanted for so long, but now that it was here, it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. The pain, the betrayal, it still stung. And maybe I realized it wasn't about his apology at all. Maybe it was about me, about finding peace within myself, not from his words but from my own ability to heal. "You can't fix it, Jake," I said quietly. "What's done is done. I've learned that sometimes people make choices that you can't change. And you can't expect others to forgive you just because you feel guilty." Jake nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. I was just lost." He sighed. "Maybe. But that's not my problem anymore. I've spent too much time carrying your weight, trying to understand you, trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. I can't do that anymore." We sat there in silence for a long while. The rain had stopped outside, but the air felt thick with unfinished business. I knew that Jake's apology wasn't going to change anything. But I also knew that this was the closure I needed. I had faced him, heard his words, and now I could walk away without any lingering questions. Finally, I stood up, taking one last look at the man who had once been my world. He was still sitting there, lost in his own thoughts, but I knew that it was over. There was no going back. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Jake," I said, my voice softer now. "But I'm done." And with that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving behind the echoes of a past that no longer had a hold on me. As I stepped into the crisp air, I felt lighter, freer. The weight of the betrayal had finally been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. As I left the cafe, the cool breeze brushed against my face, clearing my mind of the clouded thoughts that had lingered. The city around me, bustling with life, felt like a reminder of how far I had come. Despite the ache that had once consumed me, I had now carved a new path, a path where I was no longer defined by Jake or the hurt he had caused. It felt strange but also empowering, like a rebirth in a way. I took a deep breath and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that came from joy, but from knowing I had finally taken control of my own life. I wasn't going to let the past, or the people in it, hold me back anymore. There was so much more to life, and I was ready to embrace it. But even with that newfound sense of strength, I couldn't help but wonder if I was truly ready to move on completely. Jake had been a part of my life for so long, and while the hurt was fading, there was still a part of me that longed for the version of him that I had loved. The man who had whispered sweet nothings in my ear. The man who had promised me forever. But that man didn't exist anymore. He was gone, replaced by someone who had betrayed me, someone who had caused me pain. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need that man to be whole. I didn't need him to be happy. I had spent too much time letting my worth be defined by his actions, by his love. But I was enough on my own. I had always been enough. As I walked down the street, I felt the weight of my past finally loosen its grip. I could hear the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement, a rhythm that reminded me of the strength I had discovered within myself. No longer was I tied to the past, to the mistakes I had made or the pain I had endured. I had learned to forgive myself, to acknowledge my own worth, and that was all I needed to take the next step. The night was falling, the sky painted in shades of purple and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I was no longer looking back. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. There was something waiting for me out there, something I had yet to discover. And this time I was going to find it on my own terms. I picked up the pace, eager to continue my journey. I had so much more to live for, and I wasn't going to let the ghosts of my past hold me back anymore. I was done with regret, done with longing. The only thing that mattered now was the present and the future I was building for myself. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need Jake to apologize again or to beg for forgiveness. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I had learned that I could stand on my own, and that was enough. As I reached my apartment, I stood for a moment at the door, taking a deep breath. I was ready for whatever came next, whether it was a new love, new adventures, or even just a new way of living. I wasn't afraid anymore. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar warmth of my home greeting me. But it wasn't just the physical space that felt familiar, it was me. I had come home to myself. I had found peace within, and that was the most important thing of all. And as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't help but think of the journey ahead. I had been through so much, but I had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more determined than ever before. Life wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be mine. And for the first time in a long time I felt excited about what the future held. The morning light filtered through the blinds as I sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. It had been days since the confrontation, and yet, my mind still swirled with unanswered questions. I had made the decision to move on, but the emotional weight still lingered. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted my ability to stay true to myself, but something deep inside told me that I was doing the right thing. I reached for my phone, intending to check the news, but my fingers hesitated over the screen. Instead, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Jake and I, smiling at our wedding. Jake and I, holding hands on our last vacation together. It was almost impossible to reconcile the man in those photos with the one who had destroyed everything I had worked so hard to build. I couldn't ignore it. The memories were still fresh, but they no longer held the same weight. I was starting to see them for what they were. Fragments of a time that no longer defined who I was. I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the woman who had silently suffered in a broken marriage. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone more independent. And that was when I realized that the hardest part wasn't forgiving Jake or even finding the strength to move on. It was forgiving myself for not seeing the red flags earlier, for not trusting my instincts, for staying too long in a relationship that no longer served me. I wasn't just letting go of Jake. I was letting go of the guilt I had carried for so long. I had blamed myself for his betrayal, thinking that maybe I hadn't been enough, or that maybe if I had done things differently, things would have turned out differently. But as I sat there, staring at the morning sun, I understood something crucial. His choices were never my fault. I couldn't control what he did. I could only control how I responded. The thought was liberating. I sat back, letting out a deep breath. There was no more room for self-blame. No more room for regret. I was done punishing myself. And then, almost as if the universe had been listening, a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email. A new job opportunity in another city. I had been toying with the idea of starting fresh somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't haunted by memories of Jake. Place where I could find myself again. I opened the email, my heart racing a little as I read through the details. The position was perfect. A creative director for a tech startup, a company that seemed to value innovation and fresh ideas. It was exactly what I had been looking for. The pay was good, the benefits were excellent, and the opportunity to travel was something I had always wanted. The offer wasn't just a job. was a lifeline. It was a chance to leave everything behind. The pain, the betrayal, and yes, even the memories of Jake. I could feel my excitement building as I thought about the possibilities. A new city, a new chapter. The idea of stepping into a completely different world was exhilarating. It was the first real opportunity one had to define who I wanted to be, away from the shadows of the past. I didn't hesitate. I replied to the email, asking for more details about the position. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of hope. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I made a decision then and there. I wasn't going to let my past dictate my future. I wasn't going to stay stuck in a life that no longer served me. The time had come to embrace the change, to embrace the unknown. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the decision wash over me. It felt good, knowing that I had finally taken the reins of my life. And it felt even better knowing that the person who had held me back for so long, Jake, no longer had any hold over me. The future was waiting for me, and I was ready to meet it head-on. The days that followed felt like a blur. My mind was caught between the excitement of the new opportunity and the constant weight of what I had endured in my marriage. But with each passing day, the pull toward the new path grew stronger, and the weight of the past began to lift, piece by piece. I couldn't ignore it anymore, Jake. His attempts to reach out to me, his apologies, his promises to change. They came in waves. Text messages, missed calls, and even a letter. Each one more desperate than the last. He seemed to think that if he could say the right words, I would come back to him. But I had made my decision. I wasn't going to return to a life of lies and deceit, no matter how much he begged. It wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect. It was about knowing that I deserved better than the betrayal he had put me through. And I wasn't going to let my heart be pulled back into that cycle. As the weeks passed, I found myself finally letting go of the anger I had held onto for so long. I could feel my heart slowly unburdening itself, shedding the years of pain and confusion. I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for him. It was for me too. I didn't have to carry the weight of resentment anymore. It wasn't easy, but I was starting to understand that holding on to hate only hurt me, not him. I met with my lawyer and signed the final papers. The divorce was complete. There was no more holding on to what could have been. No more trying to fix what was broken beyond repair. It was over. It was time to move on. The day I handed over the last of our shared belongings, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Every item that was packed away into boxes represented a piece of my past that I was ready to leave behind. The life I had shared with Jake was no longer mine to carry, and that realization hit me with a strange sense of freedom. With the legalities settled, the emotional ties slowly fading away, and the new job opportunity on the horizon, I began to feel a deep sense of relief. I was starting to feel like myself again, the woman who had lost her way but was finding her footing once more. But there was still one thing I had to do before I could truly close this chapter. I had to say goodbye to Jake. For good. It wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation, but it was necessary. I couldn't allow myself to linger in a place of uncertainty any longer. I needed closure, and so I made the call. His voice on the other end was strained, almost as if he knew what was coming. "I know," he said softly, his voice heavy with regret. "I know this is over." I let out a deep breath. "Jake, you need to understand that I can't do this anymore. I can't keep holding on to the past. You hurt me, and I can't let you back into my life." There was silence for a moment, and then he spoke again. "I'm sorry. I never meant for things to end this way." "I know you're sorry," I said, my voice firm but calm. "But sorry doesn't fix things. You can't undo what you did. And I can't go back to who I was before." Another long silence passed, and then finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand. I just hope you can find happiness." "I will," I said. "I already am." And with that, the conversation ended. It was over. I had said what I needed to say, and for the first time in a long time I felt at peace. The phone call had been the last step in my healing process. It was the final goodbye that would allow me to truly move forward. No more lingering doubts, no more looking back. My future was waiting for me, and I was no longer tethered to a man who had failed me in every way possible. I looked out the window, the city skyline in the distance. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over everything. I thought about the life ahead of me, the new job, the new city, the new me. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, a feeling I hadn't had in years. I had made it through the worst of it, and now I was ready for the next chapter. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to smile. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine to walk. And I was ready to take the first step. The first few days after that final phone call with Jake felt like a blur. Everything I had known for the last decade of my life was suddenly erased, and I was standing on the edge of something unknown. It was terrifying, but at the same time it was exhilarating. I had spent so much of my life defining myself by my relationship with him, my role as his wife. And now I was free. Free to be me. The weight of that realization was both liberating and overwhelming. I could make decisions for myself. I could choose my path without considering anyone else's wants or needs. The world, in all its vastness, was suddenly full of possibilities. It wasn't easy, of course. My mind still wandered back to the past at times, to the moments of betrayal, to the years I had wasted on someone who couldn't appreciate what he had. I had to remind myself constantly that I deserved better than that. I had to remind myself that I was not the woman I had been a few months ago. The one who lived in fear of being abandoned. The one who kept quiet, too scared to speak up. No, I was someone new now. Stronger. Wiser. And I was determined to keep moving forward, no matter how much the past tried to pull me back. My first step toward reclaiming my independence was to get my career back on track. I had been working for the past few years, but I had let my personal life overshadow my ambitions. Now it was time to change that. I had always wanted to start my own business, and the idea felt more possible now than it ever had before. Took the leap. I had some savings, a few connections, and a lot of determination. With ease, I took the first step toward turning my dream into a reality. The decision wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I was being reckless. But then I would think about everything I had been through, and I would remember why I was doing this. I wasn't just building a business. I was building my life. It was a challenge, but it was also a chance to prove to myself that I was capable of more than just being Jake's wife. I was capable of standing on my own, of building something that was entirely mine. The first few months were tough. The business was small at first, just a few clients here and there, but the satisfaction of seeing something I had created from scratch begin to grow was unlike anything I had ever experienced. And the best part, it was mine. I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself. I spent countless hours building my brand, working on marketing strategies, reaching out to potential clients. Slowly but surely, things began to pick up. I began to realize that all the years I had spent in Jake's shadow weren't wasted. They had taught me valuable lessons about hard work, resilience, and determination. I just hadn't realized it at the time. It was during one of my late-night work sessions that I received a call. I hesitated before picking up. It was from an unknown number. "Hello," I answered, my voice still a little shaky from the work I'd been doing. "Is this Emma Collins?" a voice asked. "Yes, speaking," I replied, unsure of who it was. "This is David from Smith & Company. I've been following your business for a while, and I have to say, I'm impressed with what you're doing. We're looking to partner with someone in your field, and we think you'd be a great fit." I couldn't believe my ears. A major company wanted to partner with me. It seemed almost too good to be true. But this was what I had been working for, wasn't it? "Thank you so much for reaching out," I said, trying to sound calm despite the excitement bubbling inside of me. "I would love to hear more about the opportunity." David explained their needs and what they were looking for in a business partner. It was everything I had dreamed of. This was the moment I had been working toward, the moment when everything started to come together. My hard work, the late nights, the struggles, all of it had led to this point. "I'm very interested," I said confidently. "Let's set up a meeting to discuss the details." After the call ended, I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This was it. This was my moment. The future I had envisioned was finally within my reach. The journey I had started months ago, when everything had fallen apart, was starting to show results. I had done it. I had started over. And it was paying off. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I was no longer looking over my shoulder, wondering if Jake was going to show up or if he would try to manipulate his way back into my life. I was no longer living in fear. I was living for me now. The meeting with David went better than I could have imagined. The partnership wasn't just a professional agreement. It felt like a validation of everything I had worked for over the past few months. David was impressed with my vision, my passion for the business, and my dedication. We spent hours discussing the future, brainstorming ways to expand, and laying down the groundwork for what promised to be a successful collaboration. But even as the excitement of the partnership sunk in, I couldn't ignore the voice in the back of my head. It was the voice of doubt, the one that had whispered in my ear for so long, telling me that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't capable of standing on my own. But today I had silenced that voice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. There were contracts to sign, logistics to iron out, and decisions to be made. I poured my heart and soul into the project, dedicating every waking moment to ensuring the business would thrive. It felt like the universe was aligning in my favor, rewarding me for my perseverance and courage. I had moments where I'd pause and reflect on how far I had come. Just a few months ago, I had been living in the shadow of betrayal, drowning in the pain of what Jake had done to me. Now I was building something of my own, something that had nothing to do with him. I was finally carving out my own space in the world. And it felt incredible. But even as things seemed to be falling into place, there was a part of me that was still haunted by the past. I couldn't help but wonder if Jake would ever try to come back. Would he attempt to worm his way back into my life, pretending like nothing had happened? Would he try to manipulate me once again, using the same old tricks that had worked for so long? And then there was the question of Daniel, the man I had turned to during my darkest moments. He had been my rock, my confidant. But I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt whenever I thought about him. Was he still waiting for me? Had he moved on? Or was he secretly hoping that, somehow, we could find our way back to each other? As much as I wanted to leave the past behind and move forward, I realized that the final piece of closure I needed was to confront those unanswered questions. I had made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let anyone hold power over me again, that I wouldn't let anyone manipulate me into staying in a relationship that wasn't right. And as much as I wanted to focus on my business and my new life, I knew that I had to face Jake one last time. I had to make sure that I was truly free from his influence, from his ability to twist the truth, and from his lies. But there was still one final hurdle to overcome. As I sat at my desk late one night, working on some business documents, I received an unexpected message. It was from Jake. "Emma," the message began, "I know I've made mistakes. I've hurt you, and I'll never be able to take that back. But I'm asking for one last chance. Please, let's talk." The message was short, but it sent a shockwave through my body. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Was I ready to face him? Was I prepared to confront the past, knowing that it could open old wounds? I sat there for a long time, staring at the message. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue on with my life as if Jake no longer existed. But another part of me, a part that had been conditioned to care for him, to feel for him even after everything, was tempted to respond. I took a deep breath and set my phone down. Well, I wasn't going to fall for his games again. I had already allowed him to manipulate me for far too long. This was my life now, my time to reclaim control. I wasn't going to let him back in, not even for a moment. I didn't respond to his message. The following days felt strange. I could feel the weight of the decision I had made settling in my chest. There was a sense of finality in it, a sense that I had closed the door on that part of my life forever. But even as I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake would never really let me go. I threw myself back into my work, focusing on the partnership with Smith & Company and pushing thoughts of Jake and Daniel to the back of my mind. I knew it wouldn't be easy to let go completely, But I was determined to do so. The only way forward was to embrace the new chapter of my life, one that was mine to write. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see the fruits of my labor. The business was flourishing, and I was finally feeling like I had a sense of purpose again. I was no longer just someone's wife or ex-wife. I was Emma, a woman who had built something with her own hands, a woman who had fought for herself and come out on top. And just when I thought things were finally starting to fall into place, an unexpected message from Daniel arrived. But that's a story for another time.